and just wrote your way into music journalism.
Yes.
So,
I feel like that's more the Rocky Balboa way to go about it, right?
Thank you.
Like
Wow,
that's the more romantic approach, I feel like.
What an awesome comparison. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to call myself a journalist. I always say music journalist. Or if I'm like, in front of a judge or uh, applying for something official, then I'll pull the word journalist out just to sound respectable. But I like to downplay it because I don't know what formal journalism skills I have other than ones that I would have instinctually acquired. Although I will say, my middle and high school education was so great. I'm like still coasting on like the writing and grammar I learned in like ninth grade. I was doing more advanced writing than I ended up doing at U of R. So
it was like private school, right?
yes, there were only 52 kids in my graduating class, including me, and it was mostly wealthy kids.
I mean, it's a great thing to lean back on, right?
Totally. I'm super, super grateful for that education. I mean, I would never want to go to like alumni events and speak to the kids or anything. Be like, yeah,
why not?
Fucking fucked up twice. Not finishing school is not painful for me, but I know it is to my parents. And I just feel like in that, look, I never have any qualms about telling people. I love telling people this actually, like, oh yeah, I dropped out of college twice because they're surprised. But in that setting, I just feel like it's like, man, that's not what was expected of me there,
There also needs to be, come to think of it, there needs to be more like celebrity poster childs for folks that have dropped out of college. Because who's the go-to one you always hear? Zuckerberg.
Oh wow!
Right, like he never finished.
Zuckerberg. And who can
I don't think he finished, right?
No, he didn't.
I don't know. Oh, he did. So, but why didn't he finish? He was at Harvard, right? Is that where where was the school?
He was at Harvard.
You're right. Yeah, Harvard, right?
That's what Facebook was. It was like for pretty incoming freshman girls.
Right. The whole hot or not thing. That was like the whole thing. You rate other people.
But then what was the reason for him?
Because of Facebook.
Right. Did he get in trouble or did he get successful?
He did get in trouble, but like it started getting successful.
Right.
And then it was like, peace out. I don't need this, right?
Pretty much. I mean, it was a mix of
he got what he needed.
Yeah. And it's not the Social Network movie was not totally accurate from what I understand, but like that was one of the things that they got right. That it essentially became like a summer project. Wow. So like you had him and Eduardo Salvaron, his partner that he had to sue his way back into the company. Basically running around trying to sell ads to Facebook in between their senior and junior year of college, and it just didn't go back.
Yeah, I mean, I remember. So once I started working at this local recording studio, I did live sound at the Bug Jar on a very like rudimentary. I can't really even do that either. I mean, I can, if it's super simple, like the system at the Bug Jar at the time, I can manage because I did it for like a year and a half. But it was like a Fisher Price live sound set. It was so easy. I could probably train my daughter to do it, right? And then that turned into me working at a local recording studio. Shout out to GFI here in Rochester. Tony Gross saw me as this like floundering person with potential. And then once I got on that track, it's like my life path kind of clicked. And I remember going out for drinks with some friends of mine who had graduated U of R, and they were more impressed with where I was at, a couple of them. And I was like totally shocked by that. And so that completely popped the bubble of like, okay, I know. And then once I started writing, and then once I helped, James and I have a mutual friend here in town named Wendy Painting. She's a PhD. She wrote a book
yeah.
on Timothy McVeigh. Once I helped her with that project, I realized I'm basically a fucking lifetime student just without the school.
Right.
Because I just loved doing research. And I was like, okay, in some senses, I'm still a student. So,
By the
Lifelong
way,
student.
gotta get Wendy on here.
oh, that would be amazing. That'd be amazing.
Gotta get her. It's a hell of a story. I don't she Luke, she went deep into the
Deep.
history of Tim McVeigh.
Yeah.
Back to his roots in Niagara County.
That's right, because
Yes.
he's a Buffalo guy.
Yes, and she went to she got her doctoral dissertation in history from University of Buffalo, and I helped her edit for like 6 months. I was one of the people who helped her edit, and so she gave me a bunch of academic papers to read. I still have I have a box of them downstairs, and working on that changed my life. And at the same time, I was doing my music writing, and then I was also going to RCTV and working on like random sound shit and teaching interviewing workshops there. And I was like, oh, this is the perfect life for me, having 3 balls in the air at the same time. But being adjacent to studenthood, research, it completely changed my life. And it also helped me understand that I don't want to go that close to creepy things like that. I would recommend anybody look into Oklahoma City. If you have ever entertained any doubts about 9/11, this makes 9/11 look like a walk in the park as far as the mysterious crepitude that's like all around it. It's so creepy. It verges on comical at times. It's like so horrifying and then there are actual comical elements. I'll just share one with you. There was a gang of white supremacists that would go around the country in, I think it was Richard Nixon masks or former president masks. This was spoofed, I think, in Point Break, although it was Point
Yes.
Break.
Yeah.
Although it was Point Break before this.
Yeah, because Point Break was like late
Right.
80s, maybe?
Yeah, late
Yeah,
80s,
yeah.
but they might have
Maybe
been
was
active.
inspired by Point Break.
Probably. So they were going around robbing banks, never killed anyone or hurt anyone, raising funds for these like white supremacist terrorist activities. The leader of this bunch was a cross-dresser who had to hide his identity from his boys, his like, you know, gang white Nazi dudes, because they would have like fucking strung him up from a tree and killed him, finding out that he was like a transvestite. So he eventually became like an informant, and Wendy would get letters from him on like this purple stationery with like flowers on it. And so, I mean, this shit is so bizarre. And he was a military brat too. Like so dude, that's a percent of how bizarre, fascinating, fucked up. There's UFOs in this Area 51. There's experiments on military, like medical experiments, like undisclosed. It's fucked up.
His whole story, I feel like, is kind of not lost, but almost forgotten, unless you were alive then.
Mm-hmm.
You just never hear people talk about it.
Yeah,
right.
I think part of that's not the 9/11 effect. I think.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, and just like the internet, like pre-post internet.
oh
Well,
yeah,
and
that's a big one too.
Yes, and one of the great things about her research is she drew because her, like, she was citing papers. There was already an academic field of study that like mapped out how there's a playbook. Whenever these things happen, now we see this with shootings all the time. There's like terminology. There's all this like spring-loaded mechanism that comes into play. The lone wolf, like all of these terms of framing the paradigm. The thing with Timothy McVeigh is every single person who met the guy whether they spoke disparagingly of him or not in other ways. All of them said he was so gentle they never thought he would hurt a fly and that he hated bullies. So the personality profile of somebody who would, that everybody would say that about, to then do something as horrific as this, let's just say there's a lot of unanswered questions. And Wendy, I think, made a really important choice for her mental health to not try to solve this case. That's, she set out to say, I'm going to get the answer. And it's so bizarre, so layered, so labyrinthine, with so many, like, you know, I had suggested to her that she call her book House of Mirrors. She didn't go with that title, which is great because I can use it. But it's just so, you're just entering this universe of strangeness. But I will say, on reading that, there's no fucking way in hell any reasonable person could walk away from that official story and think it makes any sense at all.
I feel like I was just watching a documentary on him, maybe on Netflix or Amazon. Sometimes I'll do the thing where I'll dip in for 20 minutes just to kind of get the vibe, you know, just to get a taste, and then duck back out.
And if I remember correctly, Wendy's work was used at the as the basis of a HBO doc.
I'd have to, that I don't know. That would be amazing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know there is a BBC documentary from either the 90s or the early 2000s where the former, what was his title? His name was Danny something. He was a high-ranking FBI official, and he went on the BBC and said, and said, there's no way that you have 25 people, witnesses, saying they saw another person with Timothy McVeigh, and that's not something.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is weird.
Yeah, I would say that's probably my biggest doubt about it, because the John Doe number 2 thing is a very real thing. Like, there's all these news reports of like a national manhunt for another dude, and then it just got dropped.
Just got memory hold.
That's wild.
Dude, that's not even I'm telling you, that is the scratching the surface of how bizarre this case. No one is ever going to solve it. You have to, I walked away from this going, okay, you have to accept that there are like multiple layers of quantum reality all stacked on top of one another, and don't even try sometimes to make sense. It is so weird. It has direct correlations to MK Ultra. There were experiments with drugs, illegal drugs, on everybody in Timothy McVeigh's unit, and he was convinced that some military covert ops guy was going to come and save him to the very end.
Right?
Yeah, my suspicion is that Timothy McVeigh always had dissociative identity disorder, and they picked him for knowing that he had that. But dude, he went to Area 51 and looked at a fucking Black Ops helicopter, which is so ridiculous. It's like, why would you do? He climbed over the fence or something.
I wonder how much of this, like, I don't remember it all chapter and verse like you do. Obviously, you were deeper.
I don't remember chapter and verse, but I remember parts that stood out.
I wondered how much of it was like total. Like, I know he certainly said all these things without a doubt.
Yeah.
And he wrote them down, and often multiple times. I wonder how many times, how much of it was him in his brain sort of, you know,
like
kind of
glorifying himself.
Yeah, versus like how much is it in stone? I haven't asked Wendy this. I'd love to. We definitely should.
We should. She had me read a paper that is still one of the most entertaining things I've ever read in my life. I don't have the title and I can't cite it here. It is going further back because ufology has this weird overlap with right-wing extremism.
Really?
Dude, this
I would
so
not have thought like that would
no,
be like
no,
the
you wouldn't.
natural-
You wouldn't think there's these bizarre fucking. And this goes back to Lemuria and Atlantis. The
Oh yeah.
Nazis got a lot of their ideas from an Asian like belief system, which is fucking weird
Well,
too.
even the swastika isn't
Hindu.
it? It's
Yes.
Hindu, right?
Yes. So Timothy McVeigh was very much into UFOs, and somebody, so I don't remember who it was, but somebody like describing him once thought it was strange that he would like invoke Captain Picard as if he was a real person. A lot, like he would write, well, Captain Picard would do this, and they're like, wow, that's like really weird. He's like talking about Captain Picard as if like Captain Picard in his head is like a real dude. Yeah. So my guess is that this was some sort of black ops thing, and they picked him because they knew he sounded insane, and he was doing what he was told. It's just so bizarre to think that like this guy who everybody described him as like basically harmless and gentle, would do that and like bomb a fucking preschool or whatever it was, a daycare center, and kill that many people. I don't even remember what I was doing that day. I've always tried to remember what was I doing April whatever 1995, and I cannot remember hearing the news reports or anything.
I was in elementary school.
I was gonna say, I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page. You know, it's weird. You hear about like a big event like that, and you try to think back, like, what could have I been doing around that time?
I was high as fuck.
Like I was
probably
15.
I was definitely high. I'm sure I was high working at the Olive Garden, high as fuck.
I was trying to picture you working at the Olive Garden.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have heard about it until like the nightly news, or
I don't know.
Yeah.
Most I may not have heard about it.
Yeah.
Fucking. Who knows? I mean,
the internet was barely a thing, and social media non-existent.
Right.
So yeah, I think most people would have not, unless they turned on a TV, which I think is how I saw it after school.
Yeah, that one
I can still
iconic
think
shot.
of those images.
That one iconic shot of the building, flying around the building and seeing that it just got the face of it just got like ripped
Right.
out. Like,
yeah, it looked like something from Beirut, from another
right,
country.
totally.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah, sure.
It's even a little more dramatic, I think, than 9/11. I think.
I don't know about that.
Well, 9/11 is bigger. 9/11 is bigger. I do remember what I was doing that day, but
well, as do I. Yeah.
But this 9/11 felt more surreal. Beirut is a great term. When I look at 9/11, I feel like disbelief in how fucking just strange it is. But this felt like viscerally. I look at that building and I go, "Wow, man, that's fucked up." And there is one, because in doing all this research, like I said, some of it's funny, some of it's so out there. But there's this one shot of this woman that always kills me. She's slumped on the side of the building, and her husband and I think both of her kids have just died. And she's like sobbing, and she's like, "Whoever did this, I hope you feel good about yourself. I hope you feel." And it's like, oh my God, that's just like so heart-wrenching to watch. And that always kept me from looking at this as just kind of like true crime, like sensationalist fun, you know?
It's weird to think too, and I totally forgot about this. I mean, obviously I didn't forget that he was executed, but that it was so long ago, 2001, June of 2001.
Yeah.
Right. He thought the guy was going to come. He thought they were going to stage the execution, if I remember correctly, and that the guy was going to come get him. And, you know.
And if I remember correctly, he said something like that in the Ed Bradley interview with him. And Ed looked at him like he was crazy. And it was just like, the guy wholeheartedly believed like to the very end that it just wasn't going to happen.
Right. I mean, yeah, and what you have to understand with him that is not talked about very much is he was obviously traumatized by his experience in the Gulf War. He saw civilians get melted in Iraq by like jet fuel or something. He saw people killing civilians. He saw Americans killing civilians, and that stoked his anti-federalist feeling. Then he comes back, and Waco happens, and I don't quite understand. It's hard for me to get into the mindset of people that.
But he always credits that as one of the
he was there.
motivations.
he was there, like watching, like it was like it became like a tourist's hangout, for militia types, you know.
Right.
And the other thing that you have to understand is there were 3 different federal agencies operating. So one of them, yeah, the ATF, they all had undercover agents operating in the right-wing militia underground. They were not working together, so they were often reporting on one another, unaware of each other's undercover agents. And their usual tactic was to go and try and egg people on to do shit, which is what I'm convinced happened with the Sarnoff brothers. So
the Boston bomber.
Yes, Boston Marathon.
Yep,
Boston bomber guys. Yes,
the marathon bomber.
Yes.
Yep.
Why are you convinced of that?
Because there's 2 dudes that were not radicalized. They were not very in touch with their Muslim roots, and they go to this Muslim group. And those are the types of groups, if you follow Wendy's research and the people before her who she was citing, that is textbook. In fact, the BBC documentary talks about this. One of them says you could always spot who the feds were because they were always trying to get us to plan terrorist activities and kill people. So, you know, there's a lot going on here with this case. And I'll disclose the MK Ultra connection. The person most in charge of MK Ultra is one of the true monsters of history. His name is a psychiatrist named Dr. Jolyn West, known as Jolly West. He was in charge of MK Ultra. Went on for decades, actually, from the 40s to I believe it was the early 70s, where they would be dosing unsuspecting college students with LSD to try to get them to engage in what they called mind control. This went on for a long fucking time. And the families who were suing in the 90s, like they got some sort of settlement, but the part of the settlement was they couldn't disclose, they couldn't talk about it. But there's enough declassified documents, and it's like incredibly scary, terrifying stuff. Well, who was Timothy McVeigh's doctor? Jolie West came in to step in. Yeah. So, I mean, it's this thing reeks of something beyond our ability to grasp, I think.
So
was he a loner?
No. Well,
which is rare.
As a person, yes. As obviously with that incident, I mean, there was at least one co-conspirator.
At least one, probably more. 2. Yeah, because people at the rental place saw the other guy. And
yeah,
like
and there was
reports.
And also I believe he and I think what we think was Terry Nichols were seen at like some lake resort where people, like there were fishermen who saw the truck in these 2 guys in the days before.
Also, the level of explosives that it would require to like I remember there being something funky about that too, because like they you saw the side of that building. I mean, fuck, like, it wasn't just like you can't just do that with like what they thought. He thought they had a certain amount of explosive material. There was something else going on there too. And didn't he have a John Wilkes Booth t-shirt on or something?
Jeez, really?
Wow.
Yeah. Or I know he cited.
That's you don't hear that every day.
Wow. How do you even find a John Wilkes Booth t-shirt?
I don't. Well, they probably made their own in that.
Yeah, probably.
It's like, I'm surprised Walmart doesn't have one of those. You know how they got like all this retro stuff now, where they got like Goonies t-shirts and it's like Pearl Jam,
Hot Topic,
John Wilkes Booth. Yeah, Hot Topics.
Yeah, I mean, but you see, what we didn't learn from this case is you have to be super careful of this rhetoric, because now anybody can be tagged with that. Oh, right-wing extremists, conspiracy theorists. There's been so many years of history that evoke certain images of a certain type, right? That you got to be careful, because it's like, who are they portraying this way? To me, I am convinced he was approached by some covert ops superior, because he acted to the end like somebody who was just following, like he was just too comfortable with what he had done, I think. But then again, he's not the most rational cat in the drawer either. So,
yeah, I think the rational. I could see it being a mix of the two, because I know there is a history, and it's a well documented history of agents. Because the civil rights movement's a perfect example of this. There's several instances of this where it was like, okay, all of a sudden there's this person who puts up the money all of a sudden to buy the stuff to do the thing. Also, there were moments with the Weather Underground as well, where it's like, who's funding this? All of a sudden, there's this third person who's sort of just been around the group. All of a sudden, they have money to buy the explosives, and it speeds up the timeline of stuff. So it has generally been tied back to whether it is an undercover agent. Now, whether that happened with McVeigh, I don't know, but it wouldn't shock me, because there was. I know that one thing that, and this has been totally in government documents, PatCon, Patriot Conspiracy, where they were, where I believe it was the ATF was sending people undercover after Waco and around Waco, into white supremacist groups, and trying to get them to do stuff.
Wasn't Clinton pushing this? I got to brush up on my notes, but from what I understand, they were pushing anti-domestic terrorism legislation, right? Which
I don't remember.
I never quite grasped this reasoning, because it seems like false flags are a long way to go to try and enact law. Like, I don't know. That just seems, it makes sense, but it's like, wow, that's going pretty far.
You kind of have to put yourself in the time period, right? So there was all this rhetoric was flying around sort of underground. It's post the Berlin Wall, Soviet Union, the big red menace is sort of fading to oblivion. So if there's one thing you learn, is that like the scope has to move to somewhere. If the scope is off Russia, it moved internal.
Right.
And then, with 9/11, it moved to the war on terror.
Right. And then sure. But I just don't. This is what I tell people all the time, and I say this to JB quite a bit. You make the mistake of trying to think like a rational person when you try to map out these motives. You have to think like an insane person. Like the whole idea that like COVID, I was just talking with my friend who initially he was like, Sabby, you're crazy. The vaccines, blah, blah, blah. He's like, well, you know, how dare you doubt medicine science? He's completely flipped and he's a super rational guy. Interestingly, he thought the lockdowns were crazy, and I thought he was crazy for thinking that. I immediately doubted the COVID jabs right away. But on the lockdowns, I was like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, so he and I were talking because I was like, JB, I've been downtown recently. I was like, man, it looks fucking horrible. It looks like it's been gutted. It's so depressing. And Buffalo, the same thing. There are parts of New York City I've heard that look the same way. This like holocaust of small businesses, which, you know, not to invoke that term, but and he was like, oh yeah, my dad thinks that this was done on purpose to take out small businesses. And I was like, you got to go a step further than that. I'm like, I do think I do, just looking at what we know, I don't think this is an accident. I think there was an intent to kill lots of people. But I can't think of this in terms of just pure rational motive, because if it's just profit, that doesn't really make all that much sense. It's like, what level are these people operating on? And the one thing I said to him was, I'm like, I said, at the very least, there's something operating above the level of governments, because if it was just governments covering their own ass, why would they force their own military to take this shot that they know is not adequately tested? Why would they force this on pilots, on police, on firefighters, on doctors? Like, what is even mobilizing to do that kind of damage? So
I would take that a couple different places. I don't think that there's necessarily some, and this is it's so interesting because this is where we usually have a different train of logic. I go back to the market sort of like directing us down whatever weird track, and you go in the other direction. And I think I think you had a mix of, my gut reaction based on what I've learned is that there was a mistake, that you had people playing around with stuff they shouldn't have played around with. It got loose. And then there's this desperation of we have to cover our asses. At the same time, you had government sort of, holy crap, we have this brand new power at the same time.
yeah.
And then you have corporations who sort of are in between the two, intertwined with both. In terms of, whether it's developing the vaccines or okay, why is Walmart open and your mom and pop not? You know, if your mom and pop can't lobby, whether it's New York or the United States, to like, hey, keep me open, but Walmart certainly can, you know.
Right.
So like you end up with this sort of these massive companies sort of like wielding their massive amounts of power. At the same time, you have this other thing, we're kind of covering their ass, that, hey, we probably shouldn't have been playing around there with this stuff. We played around with this stuff. It got loose. Where it got loose from seems to be interesting, whether it's actually Wuhan or somewhere else. You know, I've heard some interesting things that seem logical, that it could be another location, but I think it's sort of the mix of that, and then politicians sort of like doing politician things, and in an extreme sense.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a master puppeteer sort of moving everything, because I think if there was, there would be more, things would have been smoother.
Okay, so I also don't think there's one single puppeteer. I don't. I don't believe in a quote unquote Illuminati. And actually, on a metaphysical level, I think whoever they are us anyway, because we create the hierarchical social structures that enable people to rise above everybody else anyway. So we're all participating. Whatever it is, we're all participating. I don't think there's just one thing. I do, however, agree with Chris Martenson that all of the governments of the West, almost all of them, with like a handful of exceptions, essentially fell into a lockstep following the same track. Now, James, you're right. There is some distinction to be made on the policies. I have never seen that kind of uniformity. And yes, there was different governors in different states, different things, but I've never seen the rhetoric just be so like out of the same toothpaste tube in my lifetime. That struck me as really fucking weird.
I would agree with you, but it was also an extremely weird circumstance. Like I think it's also, it's interesting because I noticed this as a reporter, and I know it's a smaller scale. My only interactions got up to Cuomo, but all right, I'll give you a specific instances. Closing schools here locally. All right. So first of all, one of my things I'll never forget, everybody's talking about a disease that moves through particles, and we crammed our way into a small classroom to talk about closing schools. All right. It always amuses me to think about this.
You should see Jim Brewer's comedy special on this from 2022, where he talks about how as soon as you get to the airport, they're like, you must do your part, wear your mask, be sure to do your part. And then there's a guy walking up and down the aisle on the airplane. Let's remind you, it's a federal crime. Except when we have peanuts. To take your mask off. He's like, isn't it great that we can eat peanuts? It's like, James, you and I talked about some of the irrational, because I was like, wait, why do you not need a mask when you're sitting down eating at a restaurant? What the fuck is that?
Yeah, but we can sit in a restaurant, we can eat, but we have to put on our mask to walk to the bathroom. But when we sit back down, all of a sudden we've moved within a force field, and we can take our mask off and eat. It
was just weird. Like nobody wanted to be caught unprepared. It seemed like, and the best analogy I can think of, and James, because you worked in local TV news, is there's always that like day where, okay, the following day there's going to be some kind of inclement weather.
Yeah,
and then it becomes a matter of, okay, all it takes is one school district to say, okay, we're closed, and then all the other ones kind of follow suit.
Exactly.
So it'll be all of a sudden, like, let's say Gage Chili is like, all right, we're closing school tomorrow because, and all sporting events, even if like the weather is supposed to be done by like 3, it's like, okay, any event, even if it's 6 or 7 p.m., everything's off, right? Everything's canceled. And it's like nobody really makes a move until that first school district does. And then once that first school district does, now it's like, okay, Irondequoit, Webster, Rochester. It's almost like nobody wants to be the one to either start it or not do it at all. Because then it looks like you're being great photo here.
That's me from the I'm wearing a waiter shirt, so that's around the time I worked at the Olive Garden.
Yeah. But just to build on your point, Luke, I totally agree. And that's exactly the logic that I saw what I was describing when we were doing in those early days, right after COVID was in the area. You think that we have this leadership that was authoritative, and no, you had a bunch of scared people who were scared to do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
They were scared to close school. They didn't know how they were going to do it. Some schools were sending kids home with Chromebooks. Many of them didn't have Chromebooks at all. Like, how are you going to continue school? They had no freaking clue how to do it. So you had all these tiers of leadership that had that this was beyond them to make these kinds of choices. And then you had authoritarian leaders. And I think I would say Cuomo definitely made some authoritarian choices. A lot of them, honestly. And others, when
Kathy
that
Hochul
stuff
got into it. Kathy Hochul. Sorry,
Kathy when that stuff started trickling downhill, it was like, okay, I'm just following rules. I mean, this is what I heard from Mayor Warren. This is what I heard from Adam Bello. It's what
Right.
I heard from Joe Morelli. Like all in that time where it was like, it was just sort of, I'm just following orders.
So in a
here's
leader's defense, it's tough because it's like you don't want to be responsible if all of a sudden this thing is worse. If it becomes like the bubonic plague,
Yeah.
or
which is what we were told to expect.
Yeah.
Right. So nobody wants to be, and I think too, there's like that instant legacy part of it, whereas like, pre-internet, you're not really getting feedback until weeks, months down the road. Nowadays, it's instant, like, you hop on social media or any website. It's like, hey, is this person doing enough? Is this person doing too much? And I think almost like leaders are, it's like you're checking the stocks almost every day of how you're doing.
That's an
and I think that had to build
to
Cuomo's, kind of, ego. And I mean that in the most just kind of down the line, like textbook definition of ego. Where it was like, okay, once he started holding like those daily briefings, it became like that's got to boost your ego a little bit, right? Because all the marks were coming in pretty quick with him, and it was, oh, okay, finally, like we're getting daily updates. Whereas I think with Trump at first, it was like few and far between. There seemed to be like that difference between what he was saying and Fauci. Whereas Cuomo was coming on, and you were getting like a play-by-play almost. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we know so far. Here's these like box score stats almost.
Sure.
And I think people liked that at first, but then it got a little weird when it almost seemed like it was the tail wagging the dog.
Well, I think I just want to jump in on that, on Cuomo in particular. I think that was sort of, all right, you're in this point where the entire culture feels incredibly vulnerable, right? And we don't know what the hell's happening, and he just filled a vacuum.
Right,
and
right.
I
think he knew that too.
Well, people were saying that he could parlay that into a run for president.
And I think he sensed that too, because I think leading up to that, like a lot of candidates or people who are thinking about running, you almost need that one huge inspiration, right? You need that one thing to kind of like catapult you.
Well,
and
you
I think for him, he probably recognized right away, hey, that's my thing. Yeah, he needed that crisis.
He smelled an opportunity. But so my one counter argument to people who think, like, I just think the science and all of the medical testimony from people who've looked into it and scientific testimony who are like, this is really fucking weird. And the way it was so aggressively pushed, the rhetoric, it's like, okay, you already got sick with COVID. Fuck you. Take this shot. You're a doctor. You're required. You're a healthcare worker. Fuck you. Take this shot or your ass is fired. Like something about that. I don't know if things moved that quickly during like World War II.
It's very interesting.
You guys are saying that, there's this sort of inherent disorganization, which I think is true about institutions, but there were aspects of this that just made it all the way to the front of the room without anything to impede them. Now, the counter argument I would make to people who think that there's this one group that's controlling everything, if that's the case, why didn't they just let us keep? They would have been better off leaving things the way they were. If you think COVID was a plandemic to reduce population and to consolidate power and to get the remaining population enmeshed into like a tech dystopian like leash, basically, you could have just done that by letting people have their Amazon Palm scan at Whole Foods. You could have gotten there without disrupting the apple cart. Now you have people actively resisting, right? And so when people propose that there's this controlling element, my question is, why does the controlling element always seem to be behaving out of desperation? Why are they afraid to lose when we were all sleepwalking into this shit to be? If you go to Whole Foods, scan your palm, you can like check out quicker.
Wait a minute.
People
You
are
can
happy
actually
to
Do
do
they
it.
really
Like,
have that?
Yeah, yeah.
I still haven't been in there. Holy
Yeah, I haven't been
smokes.
there either.
It's
Really?
disgusting. Yeah, yeah.
Oh my word.
That
And
is
they're like, oh,
creepy.
so convenient.
That is
Yeah, I
creepy.
know.
How have I not heard this? Oh
Huh.
my.
It's fucked up.
We heard about all the traffic that it was supposed to cause,
Oh yeah.
which kind of like
So, I
went
mean-
away. I've driven by there 1,000 times. I've never seen bad traffic.
Well, that Wegmans
I love
conspiracy
riding my bike there. But I mean, but I mean that, so I don't really trip on trying to figure out. It seems like it points in both directions. What you're saying, disorganization is a real thing. Human institutions jockeying for power is a real thing. And I do think there is something that operates outside of government, or maybe multiple things, to James's point, that are competing. They don't behave rationally, but they're not completely in charge either, because then we couldn't have this conversation if they were. So,
well, it brings me back to a thing that jumped out at me when I think it was Luke who was speaking. If COVID happens in 1992, are the effects the same, or 2002 even? Do we react the same way without the social media, without all of with technology being different?
could
Or
it
do
be
we end up in the
scarier?
same place?
Could it be scarier because we're not getting as updated as often, and the suspense is lingering until you get that newspaper or news report on the TV?
Or does some of it fade away because we're not constantly reminded? Like, I remember when it first hit, when it first became, holy cow, this is like the real thing, at least in terms of the public psyche, was, I think it was the night my dad and I went to a high school basketball game. My alma mater, Eastridge, against your alma mater, James, East High, sectional playoffs. We come back.
Fly, Eagles, fly.
I come back to my parents' house and we're yapping, we're recapping the game.
This
and
is
then
spring.
I get
March.
Right. So March of
2020.
2020. And all of a sudden that same night, within I feel like an hour or so, Tom Hanks and his wife announced that they caught it.
Yeah.
And then the NBA announced that they were canceling the season, or at least temporarily canceling the season. I don't remember which one it was. And then it was kind of like, oh, okay. It wasn't just one of those things that was, quote, over there or overseas. And then it was just like nonstop stuff, right? It was like every day or two, some new industry was like, hey, we're shutting down. Wegmans is like, all right, we're closing at like 10 p.m. And it was all these different things. Like schools were starting to come up with battle plans. Then it was like this domino effect. And I don't know if that would have been, I could see that still happening, in the years that you mentioned, James.
Mm-hmm.
But it does make you wonder if that instantaneous feedback plays differently in another era.
Well, it would play differently. I just wonder to James's question, I wonder, James, where we would have gotten in the long run, and what would that experience have felt like? Because yes, Luke, as you're saying, the constant input of like ambient updates amplified the fear level, but it also made it cool to just be able to chit chat with people in Zoom, because I had a great time during. I was out with James the night that James and I went to 3 bars, or I went to 3 bars, which is totally unlike me. And I remember being at Dickie's with you, looking at the news report on the TV from China, and I said, "You think that's coming here?" And you said, "Yep."
Yeah.
And you guys are you guys are 2 of the super spreaders then, passing it around.
Yeah,
maybe,
totally.
yeah,
absolutely.
But I mean, but the connectivity part also made it really pleasant too, if you could enjoy it. So it was there
was a weird sense of like, hey, we're all going through this together.
Yeah,
that's interesting, because all right, I remember having chats like this. We didn't live stream them, but I remember having chats like this with friends. We just do Zooms or do whatever. I remember a bunch of us watching a movie together, and we were all just live streaming from our houses. You obviously couldn't do that in 2002. I think it would have felt more isolating,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
kind of maybe you get even more an extreme reaction to some
Sure.
of these
And
edicts.
people going crazy and jumping out of windows or just having nervous breakdowns from being stuck with each other. But could they have enforced it as easily also?
Probably not.
Right? Because like they had people, another thing from Jim Brewer's 2022 comedy special. He like presents it as if it's a musical, and the governors are like goose stepping like Nazis, and they're singing, and they're like, and he says in like this thick German Nazi kind of accent, like, and if you see anybody under the playground, report them. Like there was that vibe. So like, oh, I'm going to report you if you're at a
Oh
playground. I
yeah.
don't know that would have
Oh
happened as much.
no, think about it. Think about it. The time period, 02. I mean, there was a lot of paranoia with 9/11. I think in that period, we probably would have conflated the two. That this was some terrorist attack.
Right, and the news would have been harping on it nonstop, and TV was more powerful back in 02 and certainly in 92. So
Yeah, certainly.
it's an interesting thought experiment. What kinds of experiences did you guys, like now that we're 4 years downstream, how would you
4
assess
years.
your experience
Wow.
of that?
I think about it every so often. The one thing that jumps out is how, this is kind of a random thought, it kind of goes with what you're asking, is how there seem to be a lot of people that were big on like, hey, we're not going to do this because we're not supposed to. Like, I don't know, can't think of an example. Go to a concert, or we can't do this, or we can't do that. But then
Have a
they would be
cookout.
having, right, but then they would be having like these big like parties for, like, oh, we're
Mhm.
going to go watch the Bills game and all
Sure.
hang out. There was a lot of like this almost hypocrisy among a lot of people. They would say like one thing, oh, I can't believe Cuomo's saying this, and then they would do like the opposite. Or even with Trump too. There
Sure.
was a lot of that. People saying like, oh, I'm not going to do that because I was told not to. But then they would be having some big birthday bash for. So I know one of my friends took his daughter to like, I think she was probably like in 4th or 5th grade at the time, to like her first Bills game. And it was like this weird like thing. Like they go to the game. You're not really, it probably wasn't the smartest move. And then she ended up getting COVID. But yet he was the one, he would be like one of the ones that would always talk about, oh, hey, we shouldn't be gathering in groups, and we should make sure you're always wearing your mask. Hey, did you get your shot? And then all of a sudden it was like, he takes his daughter to a Bills game. She gets COVID. Luckily it wasn't too crazy and she recovered fine. It was just, there was a lot of that type of hypocrisy too, I noticed.
It
Maybe
became a
people
part of
didn't
people's
see it.
identity. It became a part of people's identities.
Yeah, like let me make sure, or it would be things like, hey, we're having people have to post everything on Facebook, and there would be a lot of posts where people would say like, all right, having a little Valentine's Day celebration with some of my neighbors. We're all masked up though, just to make sure. It was like people had to show. It was like, hey, I'm getting together with a couple buddies, but wink, wink, like we're keeping our social distance. It's like, don't worry, we're not gonna crucify you if like, heaven forbid you hung out with your buddies. There was a lot of that type of stuff. That's a great question.
I had a similar one. I had a similar one where it was this girl I know. She was like, at a dance party, vaccinated only.
Right.
And it was like, oh, okay. Like, oh, that's a bit of a slap, you know what I mean? To everybody else.
Well, there was a lot of that. Yeah, see, that's interesting. I wonder whether people were even aware. I don't think people were aware of the paradoxes. I remember a musician acquaintance from here in town. He posted, it must have been 2021. Maybe it was 2020, but I think it was 2021. He went to Florida, and there was an auditorium full of people, some speaking engagement. He said, "Yeah, we're in here without our masks and we're gathering because Florida is still a free country." And I remember getting angry at that idea. Like, I did not have the instinct. Like I said, I was immediately suspicious of the jabs, but I fell into the, oh, if you're rah rah rah, like, freedom first kind of a person, you don't give a fuck about anybody else, and the whole Michigan thing, and all that. I fell into that trap. But I also remember being in a bank, seeing those painted foot little
Right.
slot things, foot diagrams, and just being like, this is completely arbitrary.
Like, it
So
felt very Orwellian.
it felt
Yes.
very arbitrary, and it felt very much designed to just lull you into complacence. I also remember thinking, wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. Like, if I was just saying that, I'm like, he's just saying that to make us feel better. Because remember, people were washing off the cardboard on,
yeah.
you wouldn't touch things that, all of a sudden, oh, what happened to this thing can live on surfaces,
Yeah.
So I did feel suspicious, but I fell into the partisan aspect of it a little bit until, of course, the jabs, and then I was like, this is absurd.
Yeah, to your point, I think I felt that, like, it became this sort of like default way to, like, all right, so obviously this country is very fractured, and it became another way that we could fracture ourselves further, in that we could, and at the same time we could clump ourselves together with certain people. And so it was this sort of tool that was used increasingly politically, just throughout society, and in each way. And one other point that came to mind as you guys were speaking, probably the most ridiculous one I've seen, I forget where I was exactly, but I was out in the field reporting through most of this, and I remember stepping into an elevator with 3 other people and having those 6-foot places at the corner, each corner of the elevator.
Great the picture.
And I'm like, what is going on here? What is going on here? This is bonkers. And
I followed all the rules for the most part. Like, got the shots, did the mask thing. I tried to keep the distance, but I did sense there almost seemed like, and maybe you mentioned this for a minute, James. I had to plug in my
no worries.
my thing for the laptop, so maybe you mentioned this, but there seemed to be like this weird. And look, I don't like Trump. I think he's a schmuck, but there did seem to be like this. I'm going to follow the rules to a T and not question everything, because that's the opposite of what, say, his followers would do. So it was almost like this way of like, I'm going to stick it to you just to show. I don't know if I'm articulating it.
No. What you're saying makes total sense.
Like, it would have been totally a different psyche and mindset and questioning things if it was like maybe like a president who wasn't.
Yeah,
and it's not even so much what he said. It was almost like
what he embodied. It was what he embodied. It was what he embodied.
Who did right? Because he never said anything necessarily pro or against all these different rules.
No,
but it was almost just the assumption that, like, not the assumption, but there were people saying, "Oh, you can't tell me to shut down my business," So then it was almost like, okay, to stick it to that guy, I'm gonna like wear my mask even when I'm home alone. There was almost like that overboard reaction,
or in someone's car, in their own car.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I just fell into the partisan trap again. Since you mentioned business, I was like, man, can these conservative motherfuckers ever stop their lust for profit? Like, is there nothing that we, so I fell into that trap.
Yeah.
All right, let's run another counterfactual. All right. Hillary Clinton wins in 2016. This still happens in 2020. Reaction the same or different?
Well, the anti-Hillary reaction would be equally vehement.
You think?
Dude, conservatives hate her. They have a
Not as much as
hatred.
liberals hate Donald Trump.
I don't know about that. You never see those "Leave your trash in Arkansas" bumper stickers?
No. I honestly, I think liberals hate Donald Trump more than conservatives hate Hillary Clinton.
I mean,
Because I honestly don't believe that conservatives think Hillary Clinton is the Antichrist. I think a lot of liberals believe Donald Trump is.
okay.
Or if
I'll
not the
concede-
Antichrist, maybe that's not the right
The
language. But it's like that he's
the next thing
he's
under
worst,
the anti.
Yeah, he's the worst possible scenario in existence. I don't think that, because I think conservatives generally hate Hillary, think she's awful, think she's corrupt, all that
Leave your
stuff.
trash in Arkansas.
Here's
it's
one
not.
small element, though, where I
Okay.
think it would have differed. And then I have to go because we have to get ready to go to a play soon
Okay.
at the local high school here. So here's where I think it would have been. It would have been kind of interesting. Is I think Hillary would have been out there more with like press conferences and not necessarily a more uniformed approach, but I think she would have been out there more. And because of that, and because they're in the same party, I think we would have saw less Cuomo. And because we would have saw less Cuomo, there wouldn't have been that like almost daily box score. Here's how many people have. So I think there would have been that different element, but you would still have the like, I'm not going to do what everybody else says I should do crowd. So that crowd would have still been everywhere and vocal. And with social media, that would have been similar.
And would have amplified the counter response.
Right.
And James, I do think you're right that the level that Hillary is hated does not match. And right, Trump is like a secular antichrist for people who don't believe in God. But the irrational, but the enmity is still there. Let me put it this way: you get a Hillary hater guy and a Trump hating woman in a room, they're probably going to end up like having sex because the tension is so great. Well, there's a good likelihood that that's going to lead to some sexual sparks.
Can we get like some kind of this sounds like it could be a TV show or something. I'm picturing like the old 90s movie trailer guy, like he was not a fan of Hillary Clinton. She despised Donald Trump. This summer. That would be a great experiment, though, somehow.
It really would.
An amazing reality show.
It really would. Unfortunately, that didn't happen during COVID because everyone was too scared for their lives. If it was a little toned down. The one thing I would say is Hillary is more of a, she's a more centered, even presence.
Yeah.
She wouldn't have charged the discourse as much. Now, would her relationship with Fauci have basically amounted to the same, where he just gets free reign to say whatever? And if to those
probably,
to those who
I think that would have been different. Honestly, I think
that's a key dynamic.
I think there was a laissez-faire attitude with a lot of Trump's presidency and different chunks of the government speaking. I think Hillary, as I got a sense of her, it's be more top down. So it would be her and Fauci together, or it didn't come up.
Where she'd be the face of it. You're saying she says too much sense of her authority, which is so funny because we look
either that or a Cuomo approach, where Cuomo he'd be front and center, and even if it's his medical leaders next to him, but he'd be front and center next to them while they're giving their thing.
There's no way Cuomo. I say there's no way Cuomo was as front and center if Hillary was president, because I think he felt like he was filling that void. And then somebody within the party would have been like, "Hey man, you got to tone it down because you're taking a lot of the spotlight away from Hillary." I think there would have been a ton of that.
And I think you're right that he saw it as an opportunity.
They'd have
That
fucked
they
the
didn't-
shit
Like
up.
a natural opportunity, right? Like, look, man, I got to get out there. New York's a different state anyway. Like he would have been out there at some point just because of New
Because
York. But
especially at that time, because remember, Biden was not firmly entrenched at that point,
no,
and the who was going to be the person in the Democratic Party was sort of in disarray. Nobody quite knew. It was him and Bernie, and so I think he saw a sliver of an opening.
yeah. And 2 weeks after those press conferences started, like all of a sudden, like all the think pieces came out, like Cuomo's, he's back in the hunt and all that stuff.
Hillary would have Don Corleone his ass for doing that. He wouldn't have dared probably do it.
Right.
He wouldn't have dared do that. I mean, yeah, so it's tough to say, but I mean Fauci is a very powerful figure in American history that, if you go back and look at his behavior and what he pursued and helped establish during the AIDS epidemic, then a lot of what happened in 2020 makes a lot of sense. I didn't know shit about that. And he seemed congenial, and he's very mediagenic and aw shucks and yuck 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 with that fucking accent, the fake New York accent. But that would have been interesting to see the dynamic between him and Hillary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
because he seemed like a different element from Trump. Like they seem, well, obviously they're different. They're different people and different,
Sure. But it actually gave
government.
Fauci more room to shine, I thought.
Yeah.
Inadvertently, it totally.
And I think less people questioned him because they kind of saw it as like team him versus.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think we end up with Fauci on donuts locally and on candles. Like I don't think we do. Like
because then it brings into like the science versus anti-science, then all the political background of that stuff too.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating.
And what if DeSantis and Ladapo were the two?
That'd be real interesting. I mean, I think you may have ended up with this sort of. Instead of rallies, against lockdowns and the vaccines, you probably like end up with rallies like for like we should have handled it this way. I think that you get that only instead of conservative, I think you end up with a progressive version of that.
I mean, because for all of DeSantis's flaws and for the fact that Florida to me seems like a very kind of batshit place. I didn't think this at first, but I thought overall he and Ladapo handled COVID in an exceedingly rational, like everything they said seemed to make sense to me after a while. And I wouldn't say that about him across the board because he's obviously a political animal and he was sensing an opportunity too, actually.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that distinguished him. I think he would have not have been. I mean, obviously, he did become the guy this time around, but he would not have been the guy. He would not have even gotten as far as he's gotten without COVID.
No. So it made and broke a couple of careers.
Yeah. Oh, lots of careers. Oh, tons.
Well, I mean, potential presidential runs.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Cuomo and DeSantis get this month's 2 honorary tickets to Sabby's gay cruise, where they can talk about their choices and where they go from here. They can hash that out.
Gentlemen,
yeah,
I got to peace out.
It was great talking to you. I wish I knew you weren't going to be on long. I would have listened to you more instead of talking over you.
Yeah,
it's been real. This was kind of cool to join because I've watched you guys for a ton of times. And then it was weird a couple times, you guys are going back and forth and I'm kind of caught up in it, like a referee who's like caught up in the game, like, oh shit, I should probably like say something or blow a whistle once in a while or something. It was just I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm actually part of this time. So have a good Sunday.
Yeah, you too. Have a great time. Dude. Have a great time at the game, the play. A
play called Alibis, which I'm excited to check out. Alibis. I think it's like a whodunit over at West Irondequoit High School. So
Nice.
we'll see how it turns out. Next time I'm on, I'll give you a review.
That sounds
Please do.
pleasant. Please do. Please do.
All right.
Adios.
Take care, man.
Howdy.
JB
Hey.
on a Sunday edition of
Sunday edition.
Media Studies.
Media Studies. I have definitely certainly interesting. Like I hadn't really thought through like all of this sort of in this way before.
No, that's why it's great to have Luke.
Yeah. Old colleague of mine.
He's a super cool guy.
Yeah. Luke is fantastic. We're at News 10 together.
Cool.
And then a long career behind the scenes there, and then at 13.
Okay.
Until,
Nice.
I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have such a distinct perspective on this, while the rest of us were kind of living this in our various professional capacities. You guys were relaying and watching it unfold from within the media edifice.
Sure. Yeah. I think that within the edifice itself, it kind of, I think now 4 years out, my conclusion is that it may have been a death knell for a lot of these media organizations, because I think that, before I even get there, I want to before I forget, there was another piece, because I don't about the whole like sort of Trump versus everything else. At the same time, you had the George Floyd Summer of Love stuff going on at this, and you had, I think the moment where I totally felt the most like, oh, this is such crap, besides that elevator, was not long after that elevator, when you had Fauci and other public health people say it was okay to protest in large crowds, but you couldn't go to a crowded restaurant. That was, for me, that was a turning point.
Well, not just for you. I mean,
Yeah.
for a lot of people.
This made no sense.
I mean, it's just so the paradoxes are so absurd. I mean, I was already. So wait, was the summer of love was 2020?
Yeah, it was 2020.
Okay, right. Okay, so that predated.
It was a couple months after COVID started.
Yeah, right. That definitely was odd, to say the least. I mean, it was just like you're living
Right
in
about
this.
now, actually.
Right. Sure. Of course. You're living in this absurd paradox, right? Yeah. And then once the shots came around, and it's like, do this to save grandma, and do this to save lives and stop transmission. It was like, wait a minute, if you have the shot and a vaccine works the way it's supposed to, why do you need me when you should be protected? Just right off the bat, that everything about that just seems so nonsensical. And then when they started forcing healthcare workers to do it anyway, even though they had already gotten it, and it was just such a one hammer for every nail kind of approach, that Luke's used the word Orwellian, that definitely rang those bells for me. I was like, something is very off here.
Well, that's also government, generally how it works. Like, it is sort of one hammer for every nail. Like, it's like it's a one size fits all approach to just about everything. The other piece I was going to say about the media, I think it did fundamentally break us in a lot of ways.
Break us, the media, or break us,
the media?
Okay.
I think organizations, I think on one side, both the employee and the employers realized that we can do things differently, and that's led to positive things like stuff like this. And you're seeing more stuff like this, like we're doing right now on television. But at the same time, I think that journalists, there's always a thing baked into journalism where you think you're a hero. You're doing something heroic. You think everything is all the president's men. And that you are your Woodward or Bernstein, even though most of it is not that. Most of it's just nuts and bolts and very simple stories, and then you work your way through complex stories next to it. I think that time made a lot of journalists feel like they were doing something sacred. And then you add the whole thing, the Trump angle of it all, the Trump of it all, and you add the science of it all, and then the racism of it all, and all that sort of. Before you got on, Luke and I were talking about our experiences in newsrooms, and we were talking about the thing that one of the things that did shock me about Yuri Berliner's story, because I was watching. I had up the NPR congressional thing.
Right.
And I said, I never saw someone overtly in the foreign newsrooms I worked in overtly say that, hey, I'm not going to cover X because I think that this was going to help this politician. You might see stuff skewed that way. There'll be soft power used that way, but people just overtly just saying, hey, we're just not doing this because we're not helping X. Like,
so let me
what?
make sure I read you right. You're saying that the people, both in editorial, not super high editorial, but like sort of general editorial, like middle management editorial, and the reporters, they don't think of what they're doing the way you said, where we're not going to do this because it would help so and so. They actually just think they're doing the right thing. It's almost like they feel like they're fulfilling the journalism equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath.
Yes. And much like with medicine and the Hippocratic Oath, you end up with malpractice in during that process. But what happened, what became more in what was the twist between all of this cultural tumult, this political tumult, and I think honestly this isolationism in this sort of social media first existence that many of us got swallowed by during that period. I think it got to the point where it's like we were living in Slack, we were living in Teams, we were that instead of like there was a disconnect. The thing that was sort of bubbling beneath took over, and you literally had journalists coming out, and high profile people coming out and like objectivity, even trying to be objective is false concept,
or wrong. It's reprehensible.
Yeah. And I think it was Wesley Lowery who wrote about moral force, and that you had to approach every story, even minor stories, with a sense of moral force.
Right, it's unethical to try to be objective,
or just to present the information that you have.
Right,
and it was okay to willfully withhold information if you think that it would help someone that you thought was bad for the culture or bad for America or whatever. So I think that all that stuff happening at once really broke much of our news infrastructure. And it was already on shaky ground because of the financials of it all. And I think we've sort of been on a downward spiral for most of it ever since.
Well, but you would also say that what's grown in its or growing in its wake has some promise, no?
Yeah, there's some promise, but the trouble is how promise is not enough. You need to be able to, okay, I'm a 40-year-old man. I have responsibility. I have debt. I have I want to eat myself. I want to clothe myself. I want to take care of my car. I want to take care of my life. I want to have a vacation. I want to be able to do all this stuff. How do we actually like pay people to do the quality work we need them to do? And with that, you need more than promise. You need something that's actually generating income. And I think a lot of the things that do have promise, the pathway to income is weak. Is also and increasingly ideologically filled.
But also not for everyone. It's not going to work for
Yeah.
everybody who gets on there.
Yeah, without a doubt.
In fact, it's not going to work for most of the people who use these tools. Yeah.
Without a doubt, including myself. But like, look, I'm on Substack. I'm fortunate enough that I have more subscribers than the mean. I do have monthly income that I get from it, and yearly income that I get from it. And those are all great things, and most people aren't able to get even that. And I'm fortunate to do that. But I couldn't just live strictly off that. And I'm one of the fortunate ones.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
right, even taking the chance on investing what it would take to maybe get to the point where you could live off of it would be a huge risk.
Yes. And as time goes on, it's tougher to make that Zuckerberg risk. There's a reason why that Zuckerberg risk could happen at 20 years old versus
his room and board was paid.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah. So it's I think we're in this sort of this space where this industry will continue in a zombified form until we figure out a new, unique way to monetize it. And I do think it'll happen. I think it's too important for it to not exist at all, and for it not to happen.
Well, and it's too many people are drawn to it. There's a market to be made there somehow.
Yeah,
because it's not like people's interest in it is not there. It's just a matter of the.
It also I think there's those larger plays, whether they're TV or radio stations or newspapers, etc., magazines. They've decayed so much, and they've abdicated so much of their audience that that audience has to go somewhere. So that's opportunity. But the question is, how do you do it different? And email is good, podcasting is good, YouTube, social media, good, but the monetization has got to happen somehow, some way.
Sure. Somebody's going to have to come and build something that was comparable to the old scaffolding. So if you look at the old media, legacy media, as like a bunch of skyscrapers in a downtown that have been decaying, somebody's either got to renovate those and fill them up or tear them down and build something new that other people can climb on board with, because entrepreneurship and being your own small business is not in everybody's wiring. You know what I mean? So,
and it's just a thing that you have to think about way more than previous generations. Which brings me to an interesting quote that I was looking at Rush Limbaugh in one of his books, and he talked about yeah, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he said, "But the business side of my work, I had little interest in the business side of my work ever." And he wrote this in 1988.
Well, he
89.
came from a time when you could afford to do that. You could afford to be talent, quote
Yeah,
unquote, and be plugged in,
and not even
selected.
care.
Right, right.
He was an
He's like a
immediate.
musician.
Yeah.
He's like a musician
Oh,
who's on
yeah.
a major label and struck
Well,
it rich.
he was on a musician on a major label that was successful 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago. Because I think even in this era, your Taylor Swifts of the world have to be, a highly successful person on a record label, has to think about that other stuff too. And even the
Sure.
people on the lower levels, they think about that. And you can
Well, I
see it in
meant
their.
yes, I like you. I meant the traditional major label system when it was
Yeah,
at its apex.
yeah. If you were the Goo Goo Dolls and Dizzy Up the Girl comes out in 96, 97, 98, whenever it was, one of those years, and it's a massive hit, you're just waiting for the money to roll in as radio
Right.
plays your song, and then you go on tour.
Well, and you're also told where to be, what to do. Your whole year, 2 years from there is mapped out for you. You're just showing up for work to various either press appearances or shows or whatever else you're doing. There's no, you have to get out and push the cart. It's being pulled. You're being dragged by the cart.
Yeah, and today, like, you can be, I think of I Love McConan. This is one of my favorite stories. So I Love McConan, who was an underground artist. He hits it big when Drake remixes one of his songs. You might have heard it. It's called Tuesday.
I don't think I
Um,
have.
and so he strikes it big, and then it's like, oh yeah, everybody's listening to McConan, and then it's like, now what? What do I do? Well, you got to sign to a major record label. So he signs to a label, and they're like, oh yeah, you have to, like, we're not going to assign you people to find your creative. You have to find your creative yourself. You have to, like, generate this stuff. And then next thing you know, he's off the record label, and it's over. And I'm sure there was always stories like that, but I think there's more stories like that now than there were.
Sure. Hope you saved those checks. If he
Hopefully, yeah,
probably got some kind of advance or production deal, something. Hope he didn't
probably,
blow through it to try to fucking keep up appearances.
yeah. So, um, uh, to bring it to why I started doing this today, I was playing around with StreamYard because I saw that you could run video in the background.
Oh, cool.
Like you could see the sparks.
Yeah, I love
flying
that.
in the background.
It looks like sparks, but are underwater gold light. And since
Yeah,
we were
that's
talking about
one.
2020, I was like, well, things were burning, so
Yeah,
but also it looks like it's underwater to me. Or slow motion sparks from like a fireplace or a
yeah, or a
campfire or
bonfire.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm playing around trying to figure out one that would be really cool to have in the background. And they added some new tools too.
Speaking of Drake, we talked on the phone the other night
Oh yeah,
about a bunch of different
yeah.
music, hip hop, pop, and I have a follow up question for you about that.
Okay. Yeah,
You know, you were saying, well, you can't think of a hip hop artist or even a pop female artist that has stuck in the upper echelon as a holdover from a previous period. But even the major hip hop acts from, let's say, like the 90s, they haven't stuck it through either at the same level. Now, would Outkast still be out there if they were out there? You know what I mean? Would they be up there? It's
But
hard to say.
that's emblematic of it too. Like it's like, okay, so you have two parties, Andre 3000 and Big Boy. One wants to keep going. The other one wants to go make flute music. Like it's just
JB disapproved. That record took
yeah.
over the steps. And Jay, with your face, like JB disapproved.
It's I think part of it is just the creatives coming together and sticking it out on a creative project is very difficult. Another part of it is just the nature of that business and the fact that we are constantly looking for the new. I think Drake in particular, one of the reasons why his run has been longer than most. And it's certainly in this era. You could argue that there were a few that had pretty long runs, like Jay-Z had a very long run, but he also retired, quote unquote, to run a record company and then started a streaming company and then came back. Like you don't have this sort of constant release tour, features, feature. Like there's this constant flow of Drake that you just haven't seen with most artists. Even Taylor Swift goes away.
Well,
as weird as it sounds.
Because Jake is stealing shit from other people and having them do it for him. But I take your point.
Yeah, for sure. But that's the only way that you get to do that at that level. Like most creative people, as creatively great as they are, they need the time to go away and figure out stuff in order to put out stuff.
Yeah, luckily he doesn't have that issue because he's not very creative.
Yeah, well, I'm not going there. Like
he's just a corporate raider, basically.
He is a corporate raider, but he's a creative dude. Like he is sort of like, look, I think even with him stealing and bringing in people into the LVO sweatshop to have artists write for him and produce for him and help him through record after record after record, to even put that to have that and put that stuff together, you have to be a very creative person.
I mean, I guess. I mean, he's very creative if he wants to slide into your DMs.
Oh yeah, for sure. Millie Bobby Brown.
No, but I see what you're saying. I mean, when does his rise? So him, Kendrick, J. Cole, Drake is the longest of run of those. Drake is going back to when Kanye was still in the picture.
Yeah. I think they all do to some degree.
But I mean, where are these guys in 10 years? Because you and I were talking about legacy acts like rock acts like Pearl Jam, Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, people like that. And you were saying that, well, there is not that equivalent of a pop female singer. Even Lady Gaga and Celine Dion are doing residencies. They're not buzzing at that all-encompassing saturation point that they were back when they were at the top, right?
Yeah, I'll clarify my point for anybody who's watching. Okay, so I think the groups we used were Pearl Jam and Alanis Morissette.
Right.
Now their launches into Jagged Little Pill, I believe, is 93, 95. And 10 comes out in 91. So they come out 4 years apart. So they're in roughly the same cohort of artists.
At least from today's standpoint, they wouldn't have necessarily been considered that back then.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean,
totally.
sort of post grunge.
Right.
You could argue that she was kind of Lilith Fairy, maybe
Right.
like a little bit of both, but very pop star. So, and we're talking about Atlantis in America instead of Atlantis in Canada,
Right.
which is a whole other thing. So you, if you look at their runs, they both start immense, giant albums, huge,
gigantic.
Even Atlantis' second album is giant too, but it's nowhere as big as Jagged Little Pill.
But it's not gigantic.
Yeah,
it's the giant little sister to.
Yeah, but we're still talking like 8 million records. That
I know.
which today would be like holy shit. But
if you actually physically sold that many actual records instead of counting the streams as it would be. Even back then, 8 million.
It was crazy.
Was insane.
Yeah, so she sold a career worth of records in 2 albums,
or even 3 times.
No, a highly successful career worth of records, in her first 2 albums.
Right. Yes.
And you could argue that Pearl Jam did something similar. I don't know 10, and then what was it called? The second one.
Versus sold about. It's a similar trajectory
but they were both massive records back to back. And you could argue that they both took similar paths in that they both sort of faded. They were into the background, got more introspective. Pearl Jam wouldn't put out videos, but Pearl Jam's stature rose. Atlantis did not. Atlantis sort of petered out and sort of became this niche act. And you could argue that Pearl Jam is as well, but they seem to have gone in a more Rolling Stones direction, U2 direction, in terms of venues that they could command and size of their success. While Atlantis on the other side is in Theaterville at this point. And that's probably at the high end of her, while the high end of Pearl Jam is a football stadium.
Yes.
And I think you could do that comparison with any other male-female act in a long run, and you're going to find a similar pattern. There aren't many female acts that over the long run sort of grow in stature. I'm sure there are exceptions to this rule. You could argue that Beyonce is bigger, that Taylor Swift got bigger.
About that.
But I think they're very much the exception to the rule. I think the huge rock act or the huge male act that stays around and keeps commanding attention over time gets bigger than most female acts. And it's not a sexist argument, I don't think, even though some people could argue that it is. But
no, you're just talking about the response. You're just talking about what their careers have done. You're not saying
I'm talking about data here.
Right. You're not saying it's because women are inferior artists. Now, a couple things. So I just looked up the numbers according to Wikipedia, according to RIAA, Recording blah, 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 of America. Now, those certifications can be funky, so they're not gospel, but the first Alanis record is 17 times platinum. So that's almost a double diamond.
Yeah. Well, and that's just in America.
Right. Yes. I'm just talking about U.S. sales. Yeah. And then the second one is 3 times RIA here in the States. So that's certified. That's what they are willing to certify. Again, artists have to pay and request for those certifications.
It's also Wikipedia, so it's whoever put it out there at the
right. Which those tend to be well sourced, by the way. The RIA is an easy thing to look up. The first Pearl Jam is 13 so far, certified at 13 U.S. sales. And the second album is 7. And the third album is 5. But then you get to the fourth album as 1. And then from there, it's no platinum.
But Atlantis drops off after the I don't know. Did Under Rug Swept make platinum at all?
I will look that up. Yield, which is the 5th Pearl Jam album,
Yeah.
is platinum, but everything else after that is gold, 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 until the last two don't have any certifications. But let me look up Alanis.
That's fascinating, though.
Yeah.
You're selling out stadiums without any certification. That's almost Grateful Dead-y.
Well, this is bolsters your point and sort of and the point I'm going to make to augment your point at the same time. So Under Rug Swept is platinum. JB was probably one of the only people that bought that record. And then So-Called Chaos, which is 04, and everything else after that doesn't
It's a great song.
Like the 3 albums, actually 4. She's released 5 albums since Under Rug Swept. Under Rug Swept is 02.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
None of those have certified anything in the US, which obviously to me doesn't mean like those records could be amazing. I don't care so much about talking about music only at that level, but
it's one metric of popularity.
Of course.
One of them. There are many others.
So here's the thing. So Pearl Jam are an interesting case because you and I were talking about this on the phone. I feel they actively sabotaged their ability to sustain, and even while working against it, it still hung in there for a while, but then appear to have like retreated from operating at that level. Now, I'm not saying that's the wrong thing to do. I sympathize with why they would want to do that. I just feel that the music felt like an active effort to undermine what had got them popular to begin with. They're an interesting case because I feel like they sort of closed their doors to that level of fame. Whereas Alanis, I'm not sure whether just the market turned on her. Right? I think the market eventually sort of turned on Pearl Jam, but they had their loyalists.
Yeah, I wouldn't say sort of. I think it did. I think absolutely. I think they did fit into the post-grunge world, right? But did it fit into the Coldplay world?
No. Pearl Jam, you're saying?
Yeah. So
you're saying the market did turn on them also.
Yeah. Around the same time that it turned on Alanis.
Right.
And then after Coldplay world, you could argue that the market turned back to them. Once you get into Strokes, Kings of Leon, those late aughts hit, White Stripes,
Morning Jacket, late kind of bands.
Yeah, you could argue that it did,
but none of the Strokes never sold well. By the way.
Yeah, but they play big rooms.
They were relevant in the culture because music journalists wanted something desperately to claim as the new thing. They never delivered commercially on that, and I
you could argue that about. I can say that about My Morning Jacket. I think My Morning Jacket is exactly that.
Sure, I think like Kings of Leon maybe have had a platinum record or gold record or two or something like that. Maybe I'm underestimating.
Yeah, I think they had multiple.
And
I gotta throw Arcade Fire in there too. In that world, then they definitely because they're definitely an arena band. At one point, after that first album. By the way, Funeral is I think it's gorgeous. I didn't like the rest of their discography. I thought it just sort of bored me at a certain point, but you could argue that the market turned back toward them, and then I think the market abandoned rock after that.
Interesting.
As a radio and streaming dominant thing. It kind of like post 2010. I mean, what is there?
Right. So here's my question though. So these are interesting examples. I think they're slightly different, but I would ask you this: which male pop star has also sustained? I mean, is it Justin Timberlake? Nah,
Pretty much.
right?
Yeah. You could
But
argue
can
it.
he?
If he's petering out, he's kind of petering out now.
So how many other are there besides him? Bruno Mars.
Bruno Mars is kind of fits that Celine Dion because I think he's
Okay,
doing that Vegas residency.
right, which is a
And I
great
also, yeah,
thing. Listen, we're not saying that's not
yeah,
a huge,
not missing it.
but it's
I
not culturally.
okay.
It's not. It's not like the guy's
Solo,
name is in the fucking ozone, like we've seen
yeah,
with
yeah.
previous.
Okay. So we're talking post Michael Jackson,
Right. So which male pop stars?
solo male
George
pop
Michael
star.
didn't make it.
Not that long, no. So I'm trying to think of 90s male pop stars. I mean, it's really a short list. Like as a solo, most are not that. The solos, I mean, your Timberlake is unique for a reason. Like, kind of in the way that Beyonce is unique in that
Right.
way. I mean,
Obviously, in sync, and
it's a similar,
obviously, right.
it's a similar
Right.
track.
Destiny's Child, right.
Yes. Um.
They were already
Because
huge, but I mean, but not everybody from.
almost every major male star in music is in a group.
Right. So like I guess what I'm saying is the industry has downsized, contracted just across the board. I do get your
I don't know
point.
that that's true.
Well, hold on.
Yeah.
First of all, record sales or even the profits from music being streamed are not what they once were.
Actually, the record companies would argue differently. They'd argue that they've had the most profitable period of their existence the last few years
for the artists themselves.
Oh, okay, that's a different deal.
Okay,
yeah.
So
Kenny Chesney, Garth Brooks.
So like again, like we said, selling 8 million today would be beyond imaginable.
Yes.
I don't even know if Taylor Swift is selling 8 million in the US.
Not 8 million. It's a couple million.
By the way they juke the numbers now.
I don't think so.
Now she's got like 18 number ones or whatever. Or no, you can't have 18 number ones.
Yeah.
She's got all 18 of the top 18 songs or something.
Yeah, I think the number ones as a statistic are like it should be thrown out at this point.
It's also juked, right? It's like
it also it's juked by the streaming companies via playlist and an algorithm, and it's also like, all right, your entire record. Back in the day, Michael Jackson's entire records were not available to radio. Taylor Swift's entire records are.
Right.
So it's just a different. It's a different metric. It's a different system.
They're not equivalent. Yeah.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be treated that way.
You're saying it's even more disparate than when you compare different eras in sports. You're saying
without a doubt. It's similar to like the steroid era of baseball versus the post-steroid era. Or you could argue maybe the Steph Curry current 3-point palooza that we are in basketball versus the Pistons championship of the aughts, where like they just sort of beat the hell out of you, and that's how they won a title.
Right. Or don't go to the third rail, but like including the Negro Leagues in Major League Baseball stats.
Okay. I'll should I go solo shot on this one?
Yeah, please.
All right.
Oh no, you can keep me on screen, but no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Address your people. No, I love it. JB addresses the nation.
Okay. Hello, America.
State of the Negroes address.
Look. Including Negro League statistics and Major League statistics is one of the most idiotic virtual signaling thing I've ever heard of. It's terrible. It's a bad idea. It doesn't say anything. The leagues aren't comparable. Yes, I know that many of those players could have played in a major league and they couldn't have done it because of awful racism. I understand it. It is absolutely true. The stats shouldn't count. They shouldn't. They should not count. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are we making this up?
Damn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel that strongly about it, but I kind of like it. I kind of like it, to be honest. But
it's not good. It's not good.
I'm glad you stood on your own on that one. That's even more too controversial for me. And I just wrote a piece.
It's not good.
And I just posted a piece on why we shouldn't capitalize the word black. But
it's not funny at all.
So we could get to that if you want, but to the pop thing,
yeah,
music has contracted in terms of what individual artists can do. Like people who would have been selling out like football stadiums, or at least you know,
at least most of the music industry.
Right. So I do think you have a point, but again, even the male pop stars are not, the flavor isn't lasting as long. And
okay. All right. So I think that brings a very interesting question, because I can keep country out of this. But why do you think the flavor, because we could argue this just broadly, and I think you might agree with this statement, that the flavor of a pop star today, or even a movie star today,
any pop phenomenon, right? Even
yeah,
TV, anything in the zeitgeist,
it's just not lasting as long. Where one of the phrases I've heard is that we're in a microwave era of content, and like we want it done in a hurry. We can't even like be patient enough to put popcorn in a bowl over the stove or over a fire. We got to throw it into the microwave, and that's how we are approaching all of our content. And this is also one of those things that make Drake remarkable, in that, like, and you can argue Kendrick Lamar as well, that you can come back over and over and over again and still be able to capture attention. And that's become harder and harder in this era than at any other time. We don't have, I could argue that we don't have the attention span. And that there are just a hell of a lot more options, like the ones we've been on for the last hour or so, hour and a half.
Yeah, I definitely think we have option fatigue, and too many. But in sort of a counter to that, though, anything that did hit like mass saturation during the period when mass saturation was a thing still has traction. So you mentioned, TV, like Seinfeld is still going to get, it's not just old people either. Like a lot of the kids on TikTok playing like lead guitar, licks. They're going to records from like the 60s and 70s. They're going like 3 generations back, playing Crosby, Stills and Nash and shit like that. So Seinfeld, The Simpsons,
well,
even The Wire to a degree, right? Still actually has more than it did at the time.
The Wire grew.
So I don't know that it's a lack of attention span, because why do they still have attention for classic stuff?
Well, I think we always did. And I think and this does get to a part of our conversation we had on the phone. Look, for the first time in human history, Seinfeld is competing with Young Sheldon and Andy Griffith's show, The Jeffersons, Cheers, and The Office. Though I think that hits 6 decades there, all at the same time, available from the same sources. Like, this is the first time that this has happened. You, in order to watch Seinfeld after Seinfeld went off the air, you had to watch it over the air TV. And traditionally, those shows don't stay on over the air TV. You couldn't watch The Jeffersons. You couldn't watch Cheers for the most part. You couldn't watch. Maybe Eddie Griffith was one of the longer ones, so you could probably find it. You could find it, but it wasn't as easy. And it was over the air, and it was played at 12 and I think 12:30 in the afternoon here in Rochester.
You'd have had to DVR it if you wanted to. You would have had to DVR it if you wanted to watch it after work,
or time your VCR. Like there was a whole process that you had to do. It wasn't even as simple as DVRing it. So we're having all this content sort of weighed against each other at the same time in a way that it just didn't happen before, where you had to, I mean, if you were in the 60s and the Beatlemania is happening, yeah, you could access sort of 50s doo-wop. Yeah, it was still on the radio some, but if you went back even further, I mean, that sort of more folky or classical music, some of it made the radio, but it wasn't all of it. It wasn't, it was whatever were on the stations at that time. And also there weren't as many outlets that were putting it out at the same time. So you have all of this stuff being pumped up into these kids' brains at the same time. And that's something that just hasn't happened. Hasn't happened with music, hasn't happened with movies, hasn't happened with TV shows, anything. Because the mechanism is entirely different.
Because the what is different?
The mechanism is entirely different.
Right.
Like there were so many controls on the mechanisms. Like I listened to this show called The Town. It's all about Hollywood and entertainment industry. It's like behind the scenes stuff.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just listening to an episode about how Hollywood measures potential movies before they make them. So they go and they will test with an average audience the idea of a tornado movie. And then they're like, okay, what about a tornado movie with Scarlett Johansson? What about a tornado movie with Robert Pattinson? Like, what about a tornado movie with Harrison Ford? Okay, and how would the audience react to that versus not? It's not a perfect science, but
no, but they're thinking like algorithms.
Yeah. But back in the day, you could do that kind of testing and then be the only movie that opens at the cinema that weekend, or one of a few. You can't do that now because you had the cinema and all the cinema releases. That's one of the reasons why most blockbusters in there, they demand that they have as many screens as possible at the theater. So there's fewer options there because they realize that I can go to Netflix, I can go to YouTube, I can go wherever, and I can watch as many other movies as I want. Like, I don't have to. That's not the only way that I can access things. I don't have to go to Blockbuster to get the thing. It's just there wherever I want it, whenever I want it. So when you add that when the mechanism changes, then it's like you're a young kid on social media. You wanna get some attention on social media, and you're like, okay, what works? Okay, oh, Seinfeld clips are still popular. What's this Seinfeld thing? And the whole Googleization of media has happened Whereas like, okay, I watch one, I go down a wormhole, I watch another, watch another, watch another, watch another, in a way that just media hasn't existed before. So what you end up with kids playing, Beatles riffs in this decade because I went through all these. I hear all the stuff on the radio. I hear all this stuff on my Spotify, and I think that's better. I also think that the fact that all of that's there has removed a lot of the stigma that we had from older music in the past. Because I know as a kid, if you were into 80s hip hop or 80s R&B or 80s pop, and I'm in high school, so it's late 90s, early aughts.
Right. That person would be out of touch. Would be
today. It's just not that way.
Right. So you're getting wider reach into previous eras.
Yeah, it's a poo-poo platter.
But things don't sink in to the soil as much in the present. And we've really been seeing that for like 20 years now.
Yeah. So that kid that's on YouTube that's 20 years old or 15 years old, all they've known is that there's access to all this stuff, easier access to all this stuff than there certainly was in the 90s or 80s.
Yeah, so I mean, I wonder looking ahead, I wonder how long we're going to have Drake or Taylor Swift or these other people that are close to their level.
think that's where we're coming back around to that original thought, right? So I think there are fewer of them for a reason. Because there's less oxygen for them. So, like, let's say there's in the cultural zeitgeist, obviously it's always expanding. But let's. By the way, I don't think it always expanded. I think it always changed, but didn't always expand. I think ours expands. But let's say there are 100 cups full of cultural. That the entire culture can drink from 100 cups. It used to be that after a time, if you're Brian McKnight and your moment has passed, and you are doing porn commercials, as he did about a decade ago, that your music was just off the table. Like it was just like it's on some oldie station and it's not thought of again. Once you fill that cup in this era, that cup's filled. It's still there. All right. And same thing with the Beatles, same thing with SWV, same thing with TLC, Garth Brooks, Kenny Chesney, Faith Hill, whoever, Brahms. All right. So when the next Drake or the next Taylor Swift comes to the table, those cups that would have been knocked off the table, they're still there. So how do you find your spot on the table to put your cup in?
Yeah, I don't know.
You don't. At a certain point.
I guess everybody is going to have to be farm to table with their music, just the same way we're having to find ourselves do that with media.
Yeah, precisely. I think that's exactly where my head's going. I mean, it's sort of like, I think that we see this with the bigger stars now. Like Ryan Gosling is a big star. The Ryan Gosling equivalent 10 years ago was a much bigger star. Same thing 20 years ago.
Christian Bale. Who would you have said?
Maybe Christian Bale.
What's the guy? Fucking. Oh my god! Why can't I remember his name? The guy from
Ben Affleck, maybe, or Matt Damon.
Yeah. Oh my god! The older guy, who was in Three Kings and the Men Who Something Sheep.
So who stared at goats? Mark Wahlberg
no, the older one. What the fuck is his name?
George Clooney.
Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe it's George Clooney. You go back
or
to
the Australian guy who played
Hugh Jackman.
Gladiator. No.
Russell Crowe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you go back to Tom Hanks. You go back to, Harrison Ford. And on so on
Or
and so
Denzel.
forth.
Don't forget Denzel.
Denzel is certainly on this list. And, and it's like, in terms of the oxygen in the room, it never clears.
Right. So are you saying that the same effect you're saying is happening in movies? So movie stars will be sort of micro,
Yeah.
like not micro popular, but like there won't be macro
Yeah.
sensational.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then a lot of it will be
that's for sure.
TV series anyway.
Well, that's exactly what's happening. Like the mechanism that we're getting it from, the feeder has changed as well.
Right.
So
right.
so like that's why, if you're David Muir, who David Muir is?
No, I don't.
All right. He's the number one news broadcaster in America
Okay.
on a traditional outlet. He is the host of ABC World News.
Okay.
His show gets 9 million viewers. All right.
Every night?
Yeah, on average.
That's pretty impressive for now,
Yeah,
or very,
very-
right? Yeah.
Yeah, very impressive.
For like terrestrial TV or
Yeah.
cable or whatever the fuck, whatever.
No one knows who the fuck he is.
Right. Never heard of him.
Not just you. I mean, just period. He's not like Tucker Carlson's a much bigger star. Chris Cuomo's a much bigger star. All right. Their audiences on terrestrial TV right now, Chris Cuomo is getting something like 200,000 people a night.
Right. right.
Tucker Carlson had 4 at his height on Fox News. What he's getting now is kind of weird. It's kind of hard to know for sure.
But it still dwarfs what but you're saying it's safe to say that it.
Well, in terms of popularity and in terms of knowledge, the things that fuel stardom, it's not like we were saying about records. It's not just the sales. So it's not just the viewership. It's, we know who this person is.
Right.
This person matters. Their opinion moves people. They could sell out theaters. They could sell merchandise. Or they could come on and talk in a microphone, and that's going to get attention to people.
Right. How much they reverberate throughout.
Precisely. Murr gets 9 million viewers and doesn't reverberate.
Wow.
Blue Bloods is on CBS. Like something like 8 million people watch it.
Which is great for a TV show, you're saying. Yeah.
Fantastic right now. Right now, most shows are barely getting 5 million right now. So, and they're getting like 8, and no one gives a shit. Except a much older audience that's not as social, that's not making as much noise in terms of the pop culture. But Tom Selleck, who's the star of Blue Bloods, is a gigantic star.
And is one of those cups that's still full.
Yeah.
From
I'll give you another example. You know what was the number one show on television last year that was not a sporting event?
You mean actual television or like
TV or broadcast or
TV?
cable? Broadcast or cable?
Okay.
Either.
Let me guess. It's going to be something that I don't know. Probably. It wasn't Law and Order or CSI or some shit like that. Give me a hint.
It was a cowboy show.
That Yosemite? No. That's. Is it old?
No.
Okay, so it was made last year.
Yeah.
Okay, you can just go ahead and tell me.
Yellowstone. You were very close.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah. That's what I was. Kevin Costner.
Whose cup's been just sitting there for the last few decades?
For 40 years now. Almost.
Yeah. And I think honestly
that is what I was thinking of. That is yeah.
I think honestly these networks are starting to realize this.
Oh.
Matlock is being remade.
Oh shit.
All right.
Oh shit, that'll be fun.
Starring Kathy Bates.
Oh wow, is as the main character.
Matlock.
As long as they don't wokeify it, it'll be
which they probably will. I mean, just like his TV, everything's going to be wokeified. But yeah, like it's the same logic.
But she's
where
great.
it's
She's
like,
great though. She's awesome.
She's
So
great. She's incredibly talented.
she's a cut.
Uh,
She's one of those cups.
that's just been sitting there. And I think that's it's affected all these industries differently. I think it's one reason why Universal is like, oh yeah, sure, we'll give Drake $400 million because we think this is a proven commodity, and we'll give him all this money. I think it's why Disney until basically nearly killed Star Wars by putting out Star Wars movie after Star Wars movie, because it's like, hey, this is like an idea that everybody knows, and we could just bank on it. We can just milk it.
They kept drinking too much from the cups. They're like, okay, you have to keep you can't just keep pouring from the same cup over and over and over. And
Sure.
Drake is like the 2 girls, 1 cup of your model. And the Strokes are like the COVID vaccine of rock music, in that they're a complete fraud
Oh, okay, all right.
and they're
I'm like,
poisonous.
poisonous.
Yeah, I think they were total bullshit.
Th-
I think
go
that
on.
whole thing.
Go on.
I mean, I didn't want to change the subject, but I think that whole thing was just a convergence of music critics and bloggers who wanted to create a moment, and they glommed onto this band. I think the whole idea that the Strokes were a rock revival is patently fucking absurd. I thought so in 2001 when this was happening, because I am friends with and was working with at the time a local musician who was asked to relocate to New York to join a band with another local musician here from Rochester that had the same manager and were touring with the Strokes. So he saw their rise firsthand. He was there. And I just could sense immediately on looking at it, which is why I compare them to the COVID jab, that there was something off and fishy. And why is this being hyped? It just felt very contrived to me by a bunch of people who were really desperate to recreate the legend of like CBGB's era, downtown New York music. There was no fucking rock revival in 2001. Guess what? Because rock never went anywhere. Every fucking 20-something and their grandmother was playing guitars. This is all a concoction, a manufacturing of consensus. Now, if you read the book, Meet Me in the Bathroom, that book is wildly entertaining. It is extremely well written, even though it's an oral history. It's very well carved. But you'll see what I'm talking about firsthand. Now, that author celebrates, forgot her name, Lizzie. The book is like sitting right over there. But all these people involved celebrate, like, oh my God, we're like the next New York thing. We're like the next New York thing. Still a really, really wildly entertaining book. They were nothing. They were all hat, no cattle.
I just want to give you that solo moment.
Thank you.
I tend to agree with you, but that's a on some of that. But I think that kind of instinct, I think is really interesting to think about, in that we all want to believe that we're a part of some gigantic moment.
Yes, and I felt it in the moment. I felt like it was being artificially created. Now, I should say, and I'll let you finish your point. I should say, I have dear friends who love that band, and I appreciate their love for that band. They are not wrong, right? The musicians I mentioned, he loves that first album. Clearly, people responded to it. Jim DeRogatis thinks that's one of the greatest albums, So there's something there that resonated, but I think the bigger story around it, to me, I just was like, this is like an illusionist's trick. So
I believe that we all want to be part of a gigantic moment in history that's inconsequential.
And that was just at the advent of MP3s, Napster, blogs, this first incursion of online availability that you're talking about, where the cups are not filling up now, right? Like we're pouring all this attention into and energy into the Strokes. It did not strike that chord. This is the first moment where things are failing to catch, right? Like if the Strokes come out in 1997, we're having a different conversation. They do sell 4 million records at least once, probably.
Yeah.
If that whole machine gets behind them and everybody's talking about them, but no, they got cut off at the knees by the very thing that created them to begin with, which was this hip online buzz. That's kind of sad, actually.
So I think I agree with everything you said there. I think we all want to be a part of something that's big and inconsequential. And I think this brings us around to the beginning of this talk when we all came together with Luke. Where's the 9/11 movie? Not 9/11. Where's the COVID movies? Where's the COVID movies? Where's the COVID music? Where's the COVID books? Where's the COVID? We were part of this massive thing, this gigantic thing, this
that pretty much
worldwide
everybody in the world just about experienced on some level.
And
you would think.
And the more I've thought about this, and I have been thinking about this a little bit.
Of course, because you're the professor of media studies.
I think it's because it's so traumatic.
And so consequential that it has the opposite effects culturally.
Yes.
That we want to get away from it because it's too big.
We are avoiding it.
I do wonder if it's because everybody thinks it's just too obvious. See, now I sound like you with the simple answer.
Yeah.
With the more direct answer, that's more your type of answer. But like, I wonder if it's like people are just like, well, that'll just be too plain at this point.
I could see that. There are so many easy comedies that could have been made about it.
Easy. The one you guys proposed based on what I said could have been made about it.
Yeah. There's so many thrillers and dramas and so much. There's so much meat there.
Why didn't the family drama? Why didn't the Ice Storm type movies fucking take off? It's a great movie, by the way. I really, I don't usually like films about like, upper middle class people stewing in their own shit, but that was really cool. But why didn't that as a genre? Now, I mean, look, podcasts fucking took off though. Right? Like, didn't the popularity of podcasts?
Well, if you look at podcasts, for sure. Yeah. And I think, even though it hasn't quite worked out, the popularity is still very strong.
Sure. Like, yes.
Like, and growing every month. Like, we're seeing, bigger numbers. We're seeing, the total number of shows has dropped off a little, but that was going to happen. Like I think what you end up, I think you also end up with people like myself who, like, I have multiple feeds, and you end up consolidating, like at a certain point, because like it's just a pain to go to multiple feeds.
But I mean, but I think your bigger point is right. Even though this kind of offsets, there was a cultural groundswell, but it's like in our entertainment, we didn't want to go to the thing that was so consequential we were swimming in it, which reminds me of a conversation you and I had also off camera.
Yeah.
Where you were talking about your introduction to Seinfeld, thinking it was always going to be like this.
Yes,
which I find so poignant.
The Seinfeld finale. Yeah. And all of it. Like, it was the biggest thing on television. And that there was monoculture moments that happened, And if you think about the 90s as a thing, from the end of Cheers and Cosby to O.J. Simpson to in the Bronco chase in the trial to like even the pop music of the time, it's sort of Chumbawamba, and Mambo number 5. Whether you like
MTV,
Mambo number 5 or not, it was all encompassing.
or just MTV Total Request Live, or
Oh,
Heavy
absolutely.
Rotation, like all that big monoculture, shared. In a way, it's like the era of shared moments.
Yeah,
The
for
last
sure.
one, and maybe the biggest one.
Yeah, I'd
was
say
this
the
more
biggest
media.
one. Yeah,
And
and I think we're all sort of. I think that just speaking to your point about the musicians in the like the forces behind them, like in my example of the Goo Goo Dolls, like, okay, they told them where to go. They structured how their ascent would be over that around the hit and how they wouldn't make it work. All of those pipes worked and worked brilliantly well. The disruption was around the corner, but it was like everything worked. Like you could get 30 million people to agree to watch a thing on a random Tuesday or Thursday. You could do it. Yeah, and now you can't even getting 10 is a massive triumph.
you're saying that like you miss it, like you're wistful for that time.
That's interesting. I don't know that I'd call myself wistful for it. I'd say that it's because I love a lot about this time. I love the fact that on a random Sunday afternoon, I can just hit live and watch Congressional Territory, and then have 2 of my friends come on. Like I freaking love that. That is
I know,
all,
it's incredible.
and it would have been seen as magic back in the 90s
Literally,
or 80s or back
literally,
further.
what we're looking at behind us would have been
Yeah,
seen as like, "Ooh, like what are you
yeah.
doing?"
So,
Yes,
but I like, there's another thought that comes to mind as I explain this, and I think this may have got to that wistful feeling that may have come out there. I just did this for my daily show. It's an episode called "It's the Best of Times, It's the Worst of Times,"
Mm.
and it's based on survey information, surveys that were released to the public that found that the peak, when we ask people about the best things in their life, it's usually around our age 11. No matter when age 11 was. You think that the news you heard was factual. You think that your family was happiest. You think that your life was best. And that as you get older, whether it's movies, music, TV shows, no matter how old you are, the stuff that you consumed in your teenage years, on average, obviously it's not everybody, on average, we think the best came from that period of time.
sure.
So
That's certainly
that was
true with
that
music.
period
Yeah.
of time for me. And maybe that's it.
Well, and you are also lucky because you lived through the last one, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am wistful for that time because I grew up in the 80s. I was born in the 70s, but I was a kid. I was like a little kid in the 70s and was really sort of becoming aware of things in the 80s. So I got 2 decades of that.
Mhm.
And there is something so warm. And I
Mhm.
feel like I felt it at the time. You don't usually feel it in the moment.
Mhm.
But I remember when Seinfeld was on primetime TV and then running twice a day
Sure.
in the afternoons from 6. There was like 2 episodes in the dinner time evening slot,
Yeah.
5 days a week
Yeah.
on the Fox affiliate in New York City.
Mhm.
And so
And here too.
Okay, so you could watch Seinfeld.
Yeah,
What is that?
7:30.
11 times a week.
Yeah.
um, and I just remember feeling like that laugh track, that set,
Mhm.
walking into my grandmother's apartment and the living room from her kitchen to have dinner. It was like being around a fireplace. It had a glow to it in the moment. Now, obviously, when I look back on it, I feel that nostalgia. But like you, I love so much about this time period. I mean, just the connectivity with each other that you can
Mhm.
talk to,
Sure.
interact with somebody off of your YouTube and your Substack, and like have
Yeah,
robust
without a
sparks
doubt.
from that, right? And who doesn't love
The most
having?
interesting, yeah,
Go ahead. No, no, please.
the most interesting people that I've encountered in the last few years, it's it's random DM and like, oh, we just start talking. And like
It's
it
amazing.
like or 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 yeah, like you said, a random comment. And then you're like, oh, cool. Let's yeah, and those are awesome.
And a genuine interaction based on something you made that leads to something. I mean, that was, you couldn't even literally, you could not even picture that that would ever happen. It was
Mhm.
inconceivable in the media model
In
before.
fact, it was seen as invasive in a little bit sort of off-putting. Remember, it was the fan letter. It
Right.
was I remember even just being working in TV, um, and thinking myself back when I was on the radio, and you're getting random letters from people. It's it's a little bit weird, but a random email or a random DM isn't.
Yeah,
Like,
strange, isn't it? Yes,
yeah,
yes. That's so it's yeah. That's an interesting um contrast. But I do think so. There's plenty I love. I love having all this music at my disposal, even though it stresses me out because I'm like stressed that I'm not listening to it enough. But you do lose something. There was something about going to a record store the
sure.
day an album. I never did one of the midnight things, but going to a record store the day something came out, waiting, anticipating, having limited access. So I feel like there is a midway point somewhere because interestingly enough, you're talking about the 90s as like the last decade of monoculture, at least so far.
Well,
But there,
when it peaked, I think it was more peak than anything else.
right, but there were already tons of more cable options, and there was an erosion starting to happen of
Yeah.
the monolith, right?
Well, but even the cable options, I mean, like you're right, they existed, but they weren't as powerful yet. Their
Right. So there was
power
a
was around the corner.
right. It was just tipping and just balanced just right to have this monoculture. Now we've tipped into something else. I mean,
We're
you're talking
shattered
about
glass.
yes, you're talking about TV shows. There's no rhythm. You're not waiting till the new shows start in the fall. It's like HBO Max will just drop the next 12 episodes or something whenever the
Yeah.
production, you know. And interestingly enough, I watched the second season of the show Tokyo Vice, which I loved for the most part. And I was pissed having to wait on the cliffhanger every week. But I remember suggesting to you years ago, all shows when they initially stream should make you wait a week. You can binge them later,
Mhm.
but you should have to sit and wait because even though I was pissed, it it extended the experience longer and the flavor lasted longer and it was more rewarding when I got to the finale.
Well,
So
that's the debate among media geek world. That it's even Netflix has decided that we're going to do some things that are just weekly. We're not going to drop everything in our Netflix way where we're dropping 12 episodes and you can binge it if you want. Um, we're in I think that I think you were ahead of your time on that one, and that yes, I think there is something gained by waiting and anticipating. For me, on my I believe it was what was it? I was 2017. It was my 13th birthday. Waiting for the Seinfeld finale, which was that day,
Wow.
and getting my first color TV, first brand new color TV of my own, and watching the Seinfeld finale in my room that day. And there was an anticipation of it, of sort of building up to that moment, and
And knowing that it was in the air, knowing that other people, you were part of
yeah,
something big and insignificant.
yeah,
Should be the name of a book you write.
actually, yeah, big and insignificant. I should I'll trademark big and I'm writing it down. Big and insignificant.
And then the logo could be big and sig or something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that those moments they were so fun and so unique, and I just don't think they're coming back anytime soon. If we look at the way the technology is going, it's going the opposite way.
Sure.
So I think we're going to have to go past the next crop of technology in order to get to the next thing that unites us. Because we're going to have more tailored content, like you were talking about, farm to table content.
Mhm.
I think that's part of it. I think we're going to have a ton of AI content. You know, as that gets stronger and stronger, it's going to be, you know, major newspapers are all signing up to get some money from OpenAI as a revenue stream, because for them to use their content in their large language models to train the AI.
Mhm.
It'll like, oh yeah, we're going to pour the money back into journalism, and what that's going to be turned into is tailored content for each of us all the time. We're going to have AI podcasts that are tailored toward the things that we liked and the things that we want. I think also one of the things that we saw in Black Mirror, I don't know if you saw the last season at all, that there was
No.
one that I think that is definitely around the corner, where we're going to see content that where we're all being recorded at all times, and then we're going to give away the rights to it so that it's poured into TV shows.
Wow.
It's poured into movies and other media.
Well, and the other thing that would happen that's also, I think, right around the corner is that the AI will
just do it anyway.
On the fly customize your content based on everything that's happening in your life, like responding to it in real time.
Yeah.
Instantly. The thing that is going to be missing, so people will be craving the sense of being pulled into something new. This is what AI and all this algorithm shit misses. And I was just watching a clip with Matt Hoffa talking about this.
Yeah.
Matt Hoffa in special ed. And I believe that was the clip. And they were complaining. It's like, well, it's based on everything I already like. It's not introducing me to something new. When the zeitgeist changed, as you were describing, we would all get pulled along into new places, or we would be part of things that were ahead of the curve and toppling the current regime. And so I think we've overplayed our hand. And just as I was saying to you, people have a widespread sort of endemic sense of temporal displacement. I've been arguing this for like 10 years, that we are craving a sense of feeling anchored in time. So you were talking about the cups being full. I think there's also an emotional, psychological component. People don't feel the current moment they're in has a character. So they glom onto things that they know have this glow, like, oh, that was an era. Those people were part of an era. And people haven't felt that for a long time. I think it's about 20 years now. And
On
especially
a
like
wide level.
Yes. Right. And I think Tumblr and Instagram even look like you're in an empty void sometimes. There's no place. It's like there's like you're in like this stasis you're nowhere. I think that profoundly bothers people, and they're craving and they don't know it. I think similarly, people are going to crave the human factor. Yes, they'll allow the AIs to passively like fucking, lick your toes because it's easy, but they're going to crave something new. So hopefully we'll have the human spirit persevere in this machinery. I think it will. I've always had high hopes for that. I don't think machines are going to take over, personally. I think human will is very strong even still. So, man, I just hope Seinfeld wasn't the last thing that was like that.
Well, I got this feeling that, and this is kind of the bet that I've made with podcasting. I think that curation and having a human curator is something that's still appealing for now. And when I get the most response, it's just that it's sort of, hey, I kind of like the way you think, like, so it's having someone bring concepts to them that are different, that feel different, and that are and fitted to their life. And I think there's room for that for now. I hope that, and this is where this is one of my nightmares. I think that not a literal one, but that the only way that we get back to the connective, the connected moments, the full moments, is something, tragedies like COVID, which is tragic on so many levels, or just some solar pulse that wipes out this technology and we have to start over on much smaller levels, or you go to the Jim Kunstler peak oil concept, where basically we can't keep up this system and we have to reform on a much smaller level, and then maybe my kids figure it, have that moment, because like I just don't see it happening. I think that's something that's, much like, the people who pine for those old school cars of the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And now we have these boxes that we drive around that all look the same and are not kind of cool looking.
But don't things inevitably cycle back? Or are you saying that you lose things over time regardless?
I think we've shifted into an era where we lose them. I think that the cycle, I think the cycle does work to a certain degree. And elements will continue to cycle, but I think there's less room in the zeitgeist for that cycle to exist, and things. And I think I think this is also to bring in one of my other, I mentioned Jim Kunstler, bringing Neil Howe to this conversation finally.
Fourth Turning?
One of the things,
No.
Neil Howe from the Fourth Turning.
Okay.
One of his arguments about history, he argues in his new book essentially that history's slowing down.
Whoa, that sounds interesting.
That we are essentially we're that things that we would do at 30, we're actually doing at 40. That we're actually like that yes, we in some ways we feel like, like the other Fourth Turning eras, like World War II, and I think they're definitely feels that way in lots of ways culturally. But he argues that actually our period feels like a pre-American, pre-Revolutionary War history, where essentially people are, you know, people aren't growing up as quickly. They're staying at home longer. They're having kids later. They're um, they're um, they're not finding their careers, and I could argue all these things about myself. But it's
Well,
not just me.
not exactly, because you've been
But
on a career track for a long time, though.
but in macro sense, those foundational things,
Mhm.
culturally, we're all doing them less,
Right.
and
You'd have
we're
in
doing them slower.
right in 1950, even 1975,
Yeah,
you'd have been married and had a house,
yeah, and on kid number 4 or whatever, or already
or
had them.
or even a grandkid on
Yeah,
the
by
way.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah, like it things sped up, and he's arguing that things have slowed down.
that sounds really fascinating. Sounds really. I got to read that book. That sounds
Yeah,
incredible. Well,
yeah.
but here's the thing. To your point, you asked me several weeks ago, what I've been listening to, and I've been listening to a lot of old blues, like really old, like the first era of, maybe not the exact first, but early recordings. I mean, these things sound haunted, and I just find it so pleasing to my ear. I didn't live through that period. I know what it was like
Mhm,
to hear old records from my grandmother playing them, and
mhm.
her sister, my grandmother and her sister. So I have some sense of what that felt like. But I mean, that's existing now online. Who's to say that some 15-year-old isn't hearing that, or 25-year-old, and feeling the same thing and going, man, I wish there was something of the now that would feel like this later. You know what I'm
Oh,
saying?
I think there are, and they do. I think they are, and they do. I I feel that same way. I love Goodfellas. It's one of my favorite movies ever. And when you watch Goodfellas and you just see, especially like the ones that aren't recut, into HD, where
Yeah.
it's shot on film, and
Yeah.
you can see how it's shot on film. Like it feels like a movie that's on film, and um and it feels differently. It doesn't feel as sterile. It's speaking to everything you're saying there. Like
Right.
it feels
Right.
like, even going to the Instagram point you made earlier. Um, it feels like, or like, everything on our phones too, right?
Sure.
I think there's a reason why we put filters on.
Sure. Of course.
It's
It's
not.
it's like an innate unconscious desire to scuff up. Didn't you mention this the other day, that things looked
Yeah,
worn?
yeah, yeah. That there is a that there's what I mentioned the other day was that there is an appeal to things that look worn. I think I mentioned, liking disposable cameras, and I got
Right.
a disposable camera when I went to college in '02, and and I ran around campus just taking photos. And looking back at those photos, it feels like another time. It feels like another place. I look at digital photos that I took 10 years ago. Now, it doesn't, other than maybe a few things that just look, oh, that's outdated. That's an outdated TV.
It
That's
could be
whatever.
today. There's
Could
no
be easily
sense of,
today.
right. That's the temporal displacement that I've been talking about. I've been thinking about organizing this into a piece for like 10 years now. I was supposed to write a piece. I got an assignment to write a piece and never delivered it, but it's a different story. Back in 2014, 15, when a musician said, as if it was he said, oh man, now you can get online, and if you want like 1982 like crossover hardcore
Mhm.
meets like, new wave of British heavy metal, you can get that exact thing. And I was like, and you think this is a good thing? And
Yeah.
he was like all excited about it, and that's when it clicked. Um, right. It's like those people are craving a feeling of being anchored in time. Also, things just feel like they move faster when you're in a fucking
Yeah.
screen all day.
Sure.
You have to like bring yourself back to walking outside and reconnecting. Goodfellas.
Hey,
Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to put my thought into your thought into my brain. I like I've been an aspiring talk radio host for a long time. It's been a long journey. I'm going to get there. I know it. It's just a
That'd
matter
be
of time.
awesome.
It's just going to happen. And this is a step on that journey. And part of that journey was going back and listening to old stuff, like you should. Every artist should do. If you're trying to do an art, go listen to people who are great at it. Like I've gone back and listened to old episodes of this guy Bruce Williams. All
Oh,
right,
I don't
Bruce
know.
Williams. He was this guy who was a businessman who ended up creating tapes back in the 1980s or 70s or 80s, teaching people how to start their own business. All right. And he ended up gaining some acclaim. So he ended up a talk show host on the radio. And there's all these old recordings of him on YouTube. And you can hear this radio recording with these old mic feel and the feeling of like it's not as sterile. It feels worn. It feels like a unique touch and feel, like unlike most of the things we do today, like where it just feels kind of clean.
Right.
Same thing.
It has
Old episodes of Patrice O'Neill on to mention all my people. Patrice O'Neill on Opie and Anthony from 15, 20 years ago, and you hear this oh, this feels like, when you hear like outtakes from musicians in the 60s, where it feels like, oh yeah, this feels like a bunch of people in a room doing a thing. And much of the content we see today and hear today doesn't feel like that. It feels like this is almost Legos being put together. It's not clean. They're clean pieces.
Yeah, you're in a vacuum. What you're describing is like an organic ambiance
Yes.
to older artifacts, recorded or media artifacts. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, but I feel like people are craving that to such a degree. There's got to be some re-emergence
Yeah.
of that in some way.
Well,
Even like oh my god, you mentioned White Stripes.
yeah.
His place in Nashville,
Yeah.
where you go and you make a record on the spot. There
Mhm.
are people that are kind of steering this back towards Jack White.
Yeah.
Is it Redman or I forgot
Third Man?
Redman? Third
Third
Man.
Man?
Thank you. Yeah. I feel like that's only going to grow and grow, and maybe optimistically, if AI continues to rob us of that even more, because those
Mhm.
pictures look fucked up, man. They look really.
Well, for now,
Uh,
it's early days.
yeah, but it's not gonna. It can't.
It's come a long way in a
I
short
know,
time.
but there's something about it that
Probably.
is off.
But that's also us. I mean, you're 50, I'm 40. But for the 10-year-old who grows up in this world, and by
they
the
are
time they're gonna be like, they're not gonna know the difference.
well, but there you have an innate humanity, though. Because again, people are craving what you're talking about, and they didn't live
Mhm.
through those times you're talking about.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
there's
right. I
something.
wasn't around. Yeah, I wasn't around when Bruce Williams was at his peak.
Right,
Like,
right. So I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, no, and there is something romantic to me about terrestrial radio. Now, you would obviously be doing it online too and everything.
yeah.
But going to a place, even doing it from your basement, but just the
Yeah.
broadcast. There's
Well,
something to me that feels magical about that.
sure. I agree. And as a guy who's been on it, it is there is man, and I you may have had this feeling because I know you've been on a couple shows, right?
Yeah, a couple.
I hope that everybody who watches this or listens gets to have an experience like I did walking into a Soul Burrito years ago and hearing your own voice waft across the radio in a room. And then the girl at the checkout line was like, heard me, I asked for my burrito and like, are you on the radio? Like, yeah, that's me. Oh my God. Like there's something about that is
Still.
It is like, whoa. And like and the people, even though I haven't been on in a couple years, but there is a connection to the people who heard me in that medium. That's, it's not exactly like the podcast because I've been on a big podcast, 40, 50,000 people, a week listening to me. My interactions with those people are much different than the interactions with the radio people.
Right. There's still something about it. It's like when musicians over and over and over and over and over. I've heard so many musicians say that the first time they heard one of their songs on the radio is what you're describing. And I always poo-pooed that. I was like, whatever. But I mean, it's got to be incredible. It's like you've somehow gotten into the transmission tower, and there's a thrill to that everybody having access to the transmission tower now doesn't quite match. But we're trying to balance the two, keep the specialness, but also have the access. So I think we're doing all right as a world. I mean, I think we'll find it.
Yeah.
I mean, when I watch those old Siskel and Ebert episodes, that feels incredible.
Those clips are amazing. Like you just watch them talk about Casino, or
it's got the chills. It's got the chills, man. It's incredible.
Oh my God. I was watching them fight about Braveheart. It was awesome.
I love it. Well, super quick before you let me go. You talked about Goodfellas.
Yeah.
And not the HD version. I haven't seen it in HD. I haven't seen it in a long time, but I was lucky enough to see it in the theater because that's 1991. So when I arrived here as a student, they played it in one of the auditoriums for the students as like a student movie to watch. It was incredible. It was incredible. And then when I went home that summer, one of my friends rented it, or somebody had it on VHS. So I watched it at my friend's apartment in the building next door to mine from 7 o'clock to whatever.
Yeah, 3 hours.
Came home, popped it in because my mother wanted to watch it. He came right home. I just watched the whole Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Came home, popped it, and my mom wanted to watch it. So I said, I'll watch the first 5 minutes or so because I just saw it. Watch the whole fucking thing again.
Yeah.
It just grabbed me a second time in a row. I don't know that I would do that now. I think my digitized brain has been hacked too much. But I mean, that says something. It completely kept my attention. That's like 4 hours of the same movie.
No, that's 6 hours of the same movie.
Okay. Is it 3 hours long?
Yeah, Goodfellas is 2.5 hours.
Okay, so it's 5 hours of the same movie.
Yeah,
I have to say, what a masterpiece.
it's one of the 4 or 5 greatest films I've ever seen.
I mean, it's like
It's amazing.
it's like a monument to cinema.
Yeah.
Like it's like one of the world's or one of moviedom's most celebrated directors. I think at the top of his game. I don't think he
Mhm.
has done. I mean, I don't. His other stuff doesn't match. You know, he's not consistently hitting there. I think that's his
Yeah,
greatest movie. I think, um, and it's
I'd agree with that.
just there's something about it that just feels like an epic. You know what it reminds me of? It's like a great double album, which is rare,
Mhm.
right? Like a really excellent start to finish, perfect double album, and it's just like a monument to the art of filmmaking. That's what I love about it. It's like it's him at the peak of his powers, but you can tell this motherfucker just loves movies, right? Like he loves the art.
And it's interesting you use the word epic because I would agree. And I think what's so interesting about it is that it's not, it doesn't have, there's no pyro, there's no special effects. It feels so big, but if you think about it, it's actually really small.
It's unassuming. It's not like the grandeur of the Godfather opening sequence, right? Where
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah. It's not like,
that's Baroque. That's very like classical symphony of film.
yeah, it's not some giant figure. It's like the biggest figure is probably Paulie, like Paul
Right, but
Sorvino's
it's
character.
more
But
the
even
interactions.
he's flipping bratwursts on
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
grill. Like,
Now I got to turn my back on you. Yeah, that's, that's a
yeah,
great
yeah.
one.
You know, it's like these friends that are doing this, you know, this illegal shit. You know, they are a makeshift family, and it's this sort of process that they go through. You know, this span of this relationship. It's just an amazing, but it feels big, but it's
It
not
does.
like the scale of the story is not. The time frame is pretty long, but it's just it's not about the scale so much because there are plenty of big movies, you know, huge scale movies that don't feel large, if you know what I mean.
Right. Sure, sure.
Right.
I think so. I think so, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, and just taking you into the world of these people, it's like you can even think that you're not interested because I'm generally not interested in mafia movies. I think it's kind of a played out
Mhm.
trope. And I know this is going to be sacrilegious, but I don't love The Godfather.
Oh, you don't think it's isn't good?
I have never I've never like enjoyed that as a movie. Like I've watched scenes of it and go, man, this
Whoa.
is incredible. I've never thought that as a movie it holds together as a whole. And everybody I've ever said that to thinks I'm crazy and will even get upset.
Not
And some people
crazy.
think I'm just saying that just to be contrary. I've never enjoyed that as a movie. I've walked into the room and been like, man, that's incredible. The symphonic character of it, sort
Mhm.
of the arc. I also love the fact that it's a tragedy because the Michael character doesn't want to go down that path, and he ends up being miserable and imprisoned by his power, which I think that movie really shows rather beautifully that power is a cage. And I think Francis Ford Coppola is an incredible director. Apocalypse Now, I think the world of that movie. Um, the
By
Godfather
the
just
way,
doesn't.
I feel about Apocalypse Now what you feel about The Godfather.
Well, it is. I agree. Apocalypse Now is the whole is not greater than the sum of the parts. The movie kind of falls apart as the further you go, but the individual scenes are so incredible. and just the vibe of it, and the you almost feel like you're losing your mind as you watch the movie. Like
Mhm.
the movie unravels and the production unraveled. If you watch Hearts of Darkness, his
Yeah.
wife's documentary, it's an incredible documentary. Dude, seriously, like fuck, he probably would have been hospitalized, like mental hygiene arrested today for behaving that way. But I think Francis Ford Coppola is an amazing director. I think it is a very important work of American art, but it doesn't keep me as a movie. Like the plot, I'm just like, what the fuck? Now I'm also spoiled because I saw Goodfellas in its entirety before I saw The Godfather. My mom loved The
Oh,
Godfather. It
okay.
was always playing on HBO. It was around. I just never watched it from start to finish. Goodfellas is more my jam, and to me, they're not even comparable. To me, Goodfellas kicks its ass. But that's like Beatles, Rolling Stones. It doesn't even matter,
Sure.
right? There's
Yeah,
no
they're
right answer.
different. They're different flavors. Yeah. Interesting. You put it that way. Yeah. I would make very similar arguments about uh Apocalypse Now.
Sure. It's for me, it's more about just the emotional response. It's like, wow, like there's some scenes in that that's just like, holy shit, this is incredible. This is so plus I think in a way it inadvertently captured the madness of Vietnam without intending to. I think it was supposed to be a story like this guy goes up the river and tries to kill this guy, and it's a metaphor for a descent into the self, and blah blah blah. He just basically lost his grip on the film, and Marlon Brando and Dennis Hopper are just improvising. But you feel almost like you've taken a drug. Like it feels like a bad trip, that movie. Not that I know what that feels like, but like there's a psychedelic quality to it. This is like, wow, this is really this is deep. Um, I'm not disparaging The Godfather. I just don't respond to it. I get it. Every single human I've ever met who's watched that movie is like, oh my God, how can you say that? How can you say that? Like Godfather 2, I can get with. Godfather 2 works as a movie for me. I watch it and go, oh, okay. Keeps me going along. Man, Goodfellas, wow. That is probably your Seinfeld experience. I'm
Mhm.
like 18, 19 watching Goodfellas, thinking, oh, this is what movies, you know, this is what they are.
Um, yeah, it's interesting. With movies, the moment that I had early on, and I may have told you this one way back, was The Matrix. I was in high school, and I think it was 1999, sophomore. I just started at East, and it was the first movie that I remember seeing that opening weekend.
Mm,
It was like an Easter weekend or something, maybe late March.
okay.
And I remember coming back to school, and across all races, a cross section, girls, jocks, stoners, like everybody, the black kids, the Hispanic kids, everybody was like quoting the Matrix, trying to be Neo. I mean, it was this uniting, like it was the original is a masterpiece. The second one's kind of, I think, kind of good. Third one's a mess. Um, but like it was a uniting moment. Like, this gets into that monocultural thing that we were talking about earlier. This was a moment where we were like, everybody was like, holy shit, did you see this movie? Oh my fuck. And like everybody in that school, and I'm sure there were a lot of schools like it, were like, had this experience, and they're like, man, every kid that didn't was like, damn, I gotta go see The Matrix. Oh my God, what is this movie, The Matrix?
Well, and it's not just the movie, it was the ad campaign leading up to it.
Yeah.
Even those
I mean,
things
I
were
could stop bullets.
moments. But back then, even that,
Yeah, the
even
trailer.
the trailer or even just a poster You were caught up in this collective anticipation. Ooh, what is this? Whoa, what's this all about? Blair Witch, also
Oh yeah,
1999, right?
similar. Yeah, I think it's if not 99, very close.
Either 98 or 2000. It's on one,
Somewhere in there.
maybe. Yeah, man, what a moment
Yeah.
to live through, right? Like, so is The Matrix maybe the last of that kind of thing in a big blockbuster movie?
I wouldn't say that. I think, look, because I do think it was before the Marvel stuff took over into the early aughts. I think there was still that because I think I had a similar moment with Kill Bill.
Right. So
Um,
movies didn't get the floor didn't crater under movies until later than it did with
yeah,
music.
yeah, until like it was Marvel became the like in the sequel Palooza became like the driver. You had less the Matrix it would have been much harder to make the Matrix 5 years later. You could have
And
made the
certainly,
Matrix 5 years before. It would have been it wouldn't have looked as good, but you could
right.
have made it 5 years before. But 5 years later, you couldn't have made it.
And if you did, it would have caught the chain of
The machine that we were talking about
mass,
earlier.
right? The mass awareness. That's cool, man. That's a cool story that all the kids, all the
Yeah.
different kids, the different cliques of kids were like all into it. That's really kind of beautiful, actually.
Yeah,
And dude, trailers don't have that anymore. I mean, you can watch a bunch of trailers on YouTube. I like it, but there was like a
but they don't have the
wow.
punch.
They don't have the
Uh,
sweep.
yeah, like it's like it's just another short video going by. It's not a unique thing.
Right, right. So I guess we're gonna have to figure out either if we can't recreate it, how to substitute that with something else. Maybe it's a matter of being closer to the people in our lives, making those moments not in a mediated form, but an actual experience. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what restores that feeling. But we need to pour something into that because we crave that. Because as Joseph Conrad would say, we are all innately drawn to stories.
Hmm.
And I don't know if he talks about this much, but to marry what he says with what you're saying, we all want to feel part of a story, part of an arc of something.
Hmm.
So Big and Insignificant, the upcoming book from
Yeah.
JB.
I I yeah, like I can picture the book right now, honestly. Like
Yo,
I got like a ton of chapters that I've been thinking about just as we've been speaking. So like I have to get on it.
get on it, dude. Get on it and do it as part, release it, paywall some of it, and to give people to, you know how to do all that shit. So,
Yeah.
But I have not seen, I've somehow managed to never see the finale of Seinfeld, and I've never heard Arcade Fire's first record.
Ooh.
Sue me, motherfucker.
I think they're both. I like most people will hate the finale of Seinfeld. They think it's bad. Because they didn't. It was not a happy ending. But it was. They got their comeuppance for being bad people, essentially. You mind if I spoil it?
I do. I don't want you to spoil it anymore. I should just
Okay.
watch it like this.
Okay.
I can find it,
Yeah,
right?
it's on Netflix.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. In Arcade Fire, I think that record's great. Much better than Neon Bible or I think The Suburbs, I think was the third one. But if I had to make a choice between the two, I'd go with Seinfeld.
Interesting. There's no particular reason why I haven't heard Arcade Fire. It's just I have so much music piled up. I barely have to lift a finger to do it, and
Have you heard the rest of their music?
not really. I've heard a little bit. It didn't initially grab me, but that's not really a reason I should listen to it. I just haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of you creating something, that should be a series for you, which is like you're listening and reviewing a record that that you totally missed.
Those albums that you're like, yeah,
That's
for some
super
reason I just never
popular,
heard. Yeah, those
super popular
iconic.
thing. Yeah,
That is a great series.
yeah.
Iconic records. I don't know what would I call that? Big and insignificant to me.
Yeah.
No, but no, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
But we all have those, you know,
Yeah.
like, and I do tend to avoid things that everybody sort of jumps on. That something bugs me
Oh,
about
that's
that.
you. Yeah, that's you. That's how you roll.
And people for years say you're just a contrarian. But no, I'm not. It's like, well, you're proving my point by saying, you know. But I will check them out now that the noise has sort of died down around them. I wonder what could they sell if they did a tour. They couldn't sell out the auditorium here.
I think they could.
Okay.
My guess is if it's very interesting because a group like them, because that record sold very well, and like they like did multiple nights at MSG in the subsequent records. Like it's like they were giant. So I wonder if there will be some nostalgia that maybe they could have a nostalgia run. Especially if they said like, okay, we're gonna play
right the whole thing.
Arcade Fire from beginning to end, and then our encores will be our encores.
Yeah, what year? So let me just check
I want to say 04, 05.
I think so. I think that's exactly right. So they're due for one of those, 20th anniversary.
They're coming up on 20 years. Which feels, oh my God, 20 years ago, I was in college. Good God.
September 14th, 2004 is Funeral.
Yeah.
So I'm surprised they haven't announced something like that already.
Yeah. And I remember reading that in Pitchfork, reading that record, that review.
What do you remember about it?
Just that it was gushing, and I didn't listen to it. I heard one of the singles. I downloaded it illegally, of course. I think it was Tunnels. And children don't grow up. Your bodies get bigger, but your heart gets torn up. I think it's a Wake Up. But I didn't listen to the whole thing until that Christmas break because I was house sitting for a professor of mine. And they're like, oh yeah, we have an iPod, and it's all loaded up and like, hey, you can use the iPod if you want. And I'm like walking through a Buffalo snowstorm, listening to Arcade Fire's Funeral, and I was sold.
What a lovely! That sounds like a great staycation.
Yeah.
Hey, you got a house sit, but here's an iPod, and then there's like natural scenery, snow.
Yeah, we'll buy you food. We'll buy you food. We'll can you feed our pets? Yeah, here's our movie DVD collection. Watch whatever you want. Just hang out for a week.
See, and to put a pin on this whole thing, I think most people in 2024 would end up having a better time if they had to house sit under the conditions you're talking about. Food, pantry, all the stuff, nice pad too, like a comfortable place where you feel good. And there were either a bunch of books and records and DVDs or things like that, versus if you took your own laptop and had the same endless options.
Sure.
You'd end up having a better time. You might want your laptop there and feel a little anxious that you didn't. But it's like, oh, we got these books, we got these. If you sort of limit your palette a little bit, limit the selection,
Yeah.
you can have a richer experience, I think. But
Yeah.
none of us is about to let go of the selection overall. And we should.
I'm looking where I'm looking for a reason, because I'm looking for the paradox of choice. It's a book. That explains exactly like what you're saying. It's the argument that that more choice isn't necessarily better. More choice actually makes us more miserable, and that sort of having this endless amounts of choices is we may think it might be good for society, but we're just fooling ourselves.
Sounds very, very interesting. I got to read that book and the book about time slowing down.
Yeah.
What a pleasure talking to you. I'm so glad you
Yeah.
reached out. To thank you for.
Yeah, no problem. And to anyone who stayed to the end, I adore you. I adore you. Oh, and also the talk show is coming.
Okay.
It's gonna come.
You falling asleep.
In stream.
Well, I'll